these skeptics? Is there a way to demonstrably show them?
Yeah, I do think all the work we are doing will help towards this because, this is not some model that's in some supercomputing facility, right? Not available to the public. I mean, you can download this and go try some of this yourself. Just like a video game, you can play the game of climate change one day, right?
Quantum physics.
So everything becomes accessible. At least my hope is, chunk of the community that is curious will have resources online that is much more open, so they feel like they can participate in that.
If you think about the scientific journey that humanity's been on over the last 300 years, it's been quite good. Just take us 10 years from now. Like, how different will things be?
I think the whole process of scientific research and development will be accelerated many, many times, right? Even orders of magnitude in some areas. And that'll just mean that we can quickly rule out things that don't work and hone in on things that work. Certainly, drugs designed by AI, they're already coming into trials, and that'll just increase fully. Personalized medicine for cancer and all of these, where we really haven't been able to understand, right, for various different targets, how to quickly design drugs. This can make it much faster and also cheaper, because right now so many of these treatments are too expensive to be done at scale. So it'll make this democratized and cheaper. And yeah, I think this will hit every area. I don't think any area is immune to this.
I think it will be interesting, won't it? 10 years' time, if it takes the average drug 10 years to come to market, and if AI systems right now are coming up with some of the potential candidates for a future successful drug, then in 10 years' time, are we going to see a waterfall of new drugs?
I mean, it may not be a huge number, right? Because you can't test all of them. It'll be more targeted. It will be personalized. It will
actually work.
Exactly, effective.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank
it's been
you,
fascinating. Yeah. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah.
Over the past decade, China has gone from a Silicon Valley copycat to a top contender in technology on the world stage.
Its ascent is peaking at a time when geopolitical tensions with the US and Europe are intensifying, and the rise of artificial intelligence has sparked a new arms race.
The US is rushing to curb China's influence in AI while balancing the need to regulate the powerful technology within its own borders.
How America manages these competing priorities will have implications for where the balance of power in tech will shift to next.
On this episode of AI IRL, we'll explore how China's playbook went from imitation to innovation and discuss what's at stake in the competition between these two superpowers.
Mustafa Suleiman, thanks so much for coming in. Now, you are the co-founder and CEO of Inflection AI and a venture partner at Greylock. Some people will know you as one of the co-founders of DeepMind, now owned by Google. Tell us, what made you want to start fresh with Inflection?
Well, now is really the moment. I mean, it was very clear to me during 2020, 2021 at Google when I was working on Lambda, the conversational AI that now powers Bard, that these large language models were truly going to be the future. And I wanted to start a company to build personal AIs, an intelligence that is completely aligned to your interests on your team and really functions as a personal assistant or a chief of staff, one that knows you intimately and over time can actually help you with practical tasks like scheduling, prioritizing, planning, and those kinds of things.
And that's what you're working with Pi.
Exactly, yeah. Pi stands for personal intelligence, and we see it as your personal assistant, essentially.
How do you feel about the concentration of power in technology right now among the big companies coming out with their own AI models? Microsoft, Google, Meta.
Well, I mean, I think you're right to point out that the big companies have the resources and the people and the compute infrastructure to be able to adapt and compete faster than ever, right? And that is a very impressive, reality of how technology works these days. It requires a huge amount of compute. And at my own company, Inflection, we've managed to raise a lot of money and build one of the largest supercomputers in the world. But on the flip side, the other trend that's taking place is that the open source movement is now almost at cutting edge. I mean, it's probably about 12 months behind the very largest models built at the big tech companies. And so that's kind of a contradictory trend. Like the big companies are getting bigger and better faster, but also everybody is now going to be able to get access to these same capabilities in open source.
Let's fast forward a little bit into the present day where the world order has changed since you first entered the tech industry. How did China go from being a copycat culture to a contender when it comes to digital innovation and specifically AI?
Yeah, I mean, China is more than a contender. I think in many respects, it's one of the leading players now. I mean, they've always been incredibly creative. And I think that we may have, sort of overstated the extent to which they were simply copying, what we were doing. And I think it's important to remain humble about the fact that, these ideas are going to be widely available to millions and millions of people. And, in many respects, all of our cultures are equally creative, and they've been able to take, tools and ideas that are available both in open source and the academic literature and move them forward, innovate at the cutting edge. They've produced a lot of very good papers, contributions to the academic conferences that have been peer reviewed. So, I just think overall it's better to take an approach of humility, acknowledging that, they're also going to be a really significant player in this field over the next few decades.
How would you rank the United States in terms of technological prowess in that world order?
Well, I mean, there's no question that we, in the US and in the West more generally are currently in the lead. I mean, we have the very best, most innovative technology companies and technology hubs. Without doubt, Silicon Valley is leading the pack. And I think we'll continue to. I think we worry too much that we're going to sort of be dislodged from our podium position.
For how long do you think?
Well, I think the question is, what does it look like to be dislodged? And is that really the right framing in the first place? Like, what is the difference between first and third? And, people talk about there being a race for AI, and it's very unclear what that looks like to come second or third in that race. I think it's sort of the wrong metaphor.
Are we talking about superpowers, Clash of the Titans sort of stuff? It reminds me of back when the previous US administration banned companies from doing a lot of business with Huawei and Huawei ended up basically having to get a lot better very quickly at making its own chip designs and all that kind of stuff. And it feels like it backfired a little bit.
Yeah, you've also advocated for the US restricting sales of some NVIDIA chips, which are crucial in training AI systems, to buyers who don't agree or who refuse to use them ethically and safely. So what do you think is the best way the US can actually flex its power? Is it through the technological innovation, or by stifling effectively some of its adversaries through regulation?
The first thing I should say about that is I don't think now is the time to do that. I mean, I think in theory, when the time comes, if the time comes for us to adopt a kind of global anti-proliferation strategy, we're worried about technologies being so powerful that we have to stop their spread. If that moment arises, and I think we're quite a long way from experiencing that, then technically that would be an appropriate containment strategy. Because much as this technology is manifested in software, it lives on the internet, it still sits on chips, whether you're training a model or serving a model. So in order to ask a model a query, you have to have access to one of those NVIDIA GPUs. And, for what it's worth, there are really only like one major company in the world that produces those high-end GPUs, NVIDIA, and they manufacture the vast majority of their chips at TSMC in Taiwan that use one single company, ASML, a Dutch company that manufactures the core chip that produces the chips, and they sit in the Netherlands. So it's actually a very narrow supply chain. And so I think the point I was sort of trying to make is that if you wanted to adopt a containment strategy, there is a supply chain where you can impose chokeholds on it.
And in 10 years from now, which country do you think will be leading the world in AI? Is it going to be the US? Will it be China? Will it be Europe?
It's going to be the US, I'm pretty sure of that. I mean, the fundamentals in the US innovation ecosystem are unquestionably the best in the world. I mean,
what could flip that balance of power?
Well, I mean, I think it's hard to say. I mean, I really do think that the US is in the strongest possible position. At the end of the day, it's talent that drives, this innovation. And talent still concentrates around a small number of physical places. Despite everything that we've experienced in the pandemic and people wanting to work remotely, it's still really important to be physically proximate to other people who, are working with you in the office. I mean, I think that trend isn't going to change. I do think China is going to catch up. I think they're going to develop their own AI chips, their own fabrication facilities. But that is going to take 5 years or so. The export controls that the US has implemented, are real, and they really will prevent China from getting access to the next frontier of models, so the GPT-5 onwards. Right now, I don't really see how China could train those kinds of models.
Is there any downside, any unintended consequences that could come from this containment strategy the US is employing?
Yes, I think it is a very aggressive strategy. The counterattacks have already started, right? China restricted gallium, which is a raw material used in chip manufacturing. And I expect them to have their own reactions in time. We're very dependent on their supply chain. And so the idea that we could completely decouple, I think, is misguided.
I'm going to just put you on the spot really briefly and wonder, can you tell, because we're all friends here.
Sure, go for it.
Do you have a major regret about your work in AI? And do you also have a major single goal?
Yeah, my major single goal is to show that it is possible to create safe and ethical artificial intelligences which are accountable to humans. There is a possible trajectory where some groups may recklessly experiment with algorithms that can self-improve. And if in 10 to 15 or 20 years' time, those kinds of AIs are set loose on the open web in a reckless way, then I can imagine that possibly causing serious harm. And so for as long as I can remember, almost 15 years that I've been involved in AI, I've been trying to raise awareness and concern about the possible ways in which it can go wrong. And part of doing that is to show a bunch of practical ways that it can go right, both with writing my book and laying out a series of containment strategies and things that we have to do in politics to improve our governance and regulation, but also in actually building and making Pi, which I think is hopefully going to continue to remain a very safe and controllable personal AI that can work for you.
Mustafa, thanks so much for coming in. Been a pleasure.
Thanks very much for having me. It's been great.
Helen Toner, thank you so much for joining us. You're a director at Georgetown Center for Security and Emerging Technology, and you're also an OpenAI board member. Dan Wang, thank you so much for joining us. You're a visiting scholar at the Tsai China Center at Yale Law School, and you've been studying technology and China for many years now.
And we've just heard from Mustafa Suleyman, and he thinks that China's emerged as one of the biggest contenders in AI. So Helen, I'm just curious to start with, do you think we're overestimating China's capabilities?
It's certainly true that they're a big player. And it's also true that we shouldn't underestimate them and that we have a bit of a history of underestimating China's ability to innovate. I mean, I think 10, 15 years ago, the story, at least in Washington, D.C., where I'm based, was, yeah, China can't innovate. If they're producing things that look like new technology, it's because they've stolen them. I think that's clearly no longer true. At the same time, I think it's also very possible to overestimate them. And sometimes I think I see that as well. So are they a serious competitor? Yes. Are they eating our lunch? No.
So that copycat culture, it's fair to say that most people are thinking we're past that stage. Dan, what do you think of that?
Well, I think it's certainly the case that China focuses on different things. So President Xi Jinping is, I think, a little bit less enamored with the internet platforms, with a lot of the cryptocurrencies, with a lot of the AI businesses that Silicon Valley specializes. He's also a little bit less enamored of Wall Street and financialization and hedge funds. And if I had to think about what Xi's broad views are, it would be much closer to being something like capitalism with German characteristics, which is much more about building cars, building hydraulic pumps, building heavy machinery, the heavier the better, about all sorts of these major industrial projects. And I think China is very much a leader in things that include electric vehicle batteries now, solar photovoltaics. It is making a lot of electronics products, and it is innovating on a huge sort of a lot of the automotive supply chain. But I think they have a little bit less of a focus on AI, and therefore there is not so much political direction anymore to really push forward these consumer applications.
I think it's fair, though, that some of those areas, the US is also innovating very, very strongly. So are there any areas where China is innovating significantly better than the US?
Well, I would say something like electric vehicle batteries, where China has something like the 70% of all global expansion, all global capacity of electric vehicle batteries is now mostly in China. When it comes to the clean technology supply chain, again, these very industrial projects, these pieces of heavy machinery, that is a little bit more the focus. I think the U.S. is really strong in things that include semiconductors, artificial intelligence, biotechnology. These are things, the smaller things, where China is not so good, but there are big areas in which China is way outbuilding the U.S.
I mean, the semiconductors is getting significantly better in China. I mean, partly maybe as a result of the Huawei issue. Helen, what's your view on the semiconductor side of this?
So China's definitely been investing for decades in trying to have their own independent semiconductor supply chain, and they've been making some progress. The thing to know about semiconductors is there's a huge range of sophistication, from the really basic semiconductors, computer chips that go in basic devices, your smart fridge, your car, up to the kind of more advanced chips that might go in a brand new iPhone, up to very advanced chips that go in kind of the data centers, gigantic warehouses full of computing, which is what you're training advanced AI systems on. So China has made a lot of progress on the more basic end of the semiconductor sort of scale, and is still really struggling to hit the most advanced end. And that's where, it's not even, you can't even say the US is, alone able to create those advanced semiconductors, but what you have is an incredibly advanced global supply chain.
Many describe artificial intelligence and its development across these two superpowers as an arms race. Is that framework misguided, do you think?
I think it's a bit misguided. I think you really want to look at what kind of AI are we talking about, and in what way might it be a race. I think the place where it's clearest that it makes sense to think in a competitive framework is in kind of military domains. So, it's just true that the US military really wants to make sure that it is keeping pace with, and ideally a little ahead of, the Chinese, or a lot ahead of the Chinese military in terms of what technology they have.
Dan, Washington has taken some steps to curtail some of China's ability to get their hands on the cutting edge chips that really power these AI platforms. What's your take on that? Is that an effective strategy, or will China just find a way to build their own?
I think that China is going to try to figure out a lot of the way to build their own. A lot of the chip makers now have been under very significant stress from US sanctions dating back to about a year ago now, released by the Biden administration, that is really stopping their ability to access not just the high-end chips, but also the semiconductor production equipment as well.
And I think in general, it's really difficult to distinguish between what kinds of technologies should the US really not want China to be able to develop, and where is it fine. So, you mentioned, clean technologies before, where China, if you're looking at, manufacturing solar panels, as you mentioned, EV batteries, a lot of other areas, China is doing amazingly at that. And what you're starting to hear in some, US policymaking circles is that maybe that's a bad thing, that China is making a lot of kind of clean technology stuff. And I find that a little sort of tricky to reckon with, is at what point do we want to really shut them out or prevent them from being, able to manufacture anything if it's something good, useful that we can use. Of course, if it's technologies that we think have really significant military value, I understand, but then it starts, the lines between those categories start to get very, very blurred.
It seems like these tensions are just ratcheting it up even higher as time goes on. With each administration, they're intensifying. So to your point, if we do need these other technologies, solar technology for this transition into a greener future, what kind of happens next? How much do we place on kind of the AI arms race that could then potentially work against us in climate change? Is that a concern, or is that too far in the future still?
Well, a few months ago, Beijing did announce some export controls on certain solar technologies involved in making production wafers.
So it's already happening.
It is already happening, that there are some threats out there that, relatively speaking, Beijing has been pretty restrained against retaliating against American companies of the likes of Intel, of the likes of Tesla so far, but these things could escalate more.
does the relationship between, the ruling party in China play out against the kind of the development of companies?
I think the Chinese system is definitely more top-down when it comes to AI development. You see less kind of individual tech companies like OpenAI or Google taking the lead, and more these kind of multi-institution partnerships, or maybe you have a university and a tech company and a government, department all collaborating on big AI projects. That's much more common in China. At the same time, China is a huge country, so there's a limit to how much the government can achieve from the top. So a lot of what you see is sort of Beijing providing direction, providing ideas, providing sort of signaling of this is what we in the central government would be excited about.
Dan, how would you compare how the Chinese government is handling AI with its people versus how they handled social media?
Well, I think President Xi Jinping doesn't necessarily view AI right now, a lot of these ChatGPT-like applications, as some of the most economically productive things that are coming into our society. So I think that President Xi looks much more at AI like he would at Facebook or Twitter, now known as X or whatever it is. These are platforms like TikTok that, if you're asking me, is something like TikTok or Facebook really increasing my personal productivity? Well, I would say actually it is really horribly detracting from my productivity. And so I think that a lot of these AI platforms right now create speech issues. When an ordinary Chinese person sitting in Beijing or Shanghai asks AI, well, what happened in 1989? Well, what do you think of socialism? What do you think of President Xi's performance? These AI tools are having a lot of challenges actually answering socialist correct values that are in line with the government's ideas. And so these are major speech platforms, first and foremost, and perhaps not really the economically miraculous thing that raises our productivity growth at the very moment. Now, it might happen later on. Right now, I think the party views it as somewhere between economically not that useful and potentially very socially destabilizing.
So from a consumer standpoint, AI is almost, it can potentially create more problems for the Chinese Communist Party. But then if you look at it from like a surveillance standpoint or military type of AI applications, that's kind of in a different camp. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think they're definitely, one area where China is, I would say, leading in AI is on surveillance. They really have leaned hard into facial recognition, voice recognition, even gait recognition. So how you walk in a crowd, can they pick you out by that? I think in the West, there's been some development of these technologies, but with a lot of criticism from civil society, a lot of hesitation, sort of, I would say, like very yellow light. And in China, it's been blaring green light.
On the topic of WeChat, when we spoke ahead of this, I think we touched on the fact that there are some generalized misunderstandings about China's approach to social media and data and AI. AI relying on huge amounts of data, and the perception is that because of things like WeChat and similar things in China, that there's this huge pool of data that the population in China is very happy giving over and is used to giving over, and therefore is just sitting around waiting to be exploited by AI. And I remember that you made a pretty significant point. It's like, that's probably not really the case. And people think that's the case, but it isn't. So I wonder if you could touch on that.
Yeah, I think people have this perception that because the Chinese government is very controlling and has a lot of access to what's going on in Chinese citizens' private lives, that means that there's these beautifully curated, extremely complete, large databases of information that can be used to train AI systems or to do other things. But for anyone who's ever worked with data, you know that cleaning data, structuring data, making sure that the right information is flowing in the right places is incredibly challenging. So it's both true that the Chinese government can get very detailed information on the private lives of its citizens if it chooses to, and also true that it's incredibly messy the way that works, and incredibly difficult for any given actor to get access to something. So, for instance, a company trying to train some AI model using data is actually subject to a pretty significant data governance setup in China, data governance regulations that make it really challenging to use customers' data for things it wasn't already designed for, or that you didn't already get consent for.
Which we learned from Cambridge Analytica scandal just as one case, and there are many others. That is not the case in the US. It's not the case in Europe. There's a lot going on. The EU's AI Act is pretty widely praised by some people, not everybody, but it's quite broad and far-reaching. But that's not the case in China. in terms of what you're saying?
So China's setup is now more similar to the GDPR that exists in Europe. So around kind of protecting consumer data and giving people the right to, opt in to different uses. Of course, in China, there's always the exception, unless the security services, think that you might be a dissident, and then they're going to get whatever they want on you. But in terms of kind of companies, they're certainly relatively restricted in what they can do.
Switching gears a little bit, Dan, I'm curious about how China's sluggish economic growth recently weighs into the government's calculus and how they're thinking about AI's potential to spark social unrest.
I think that the Communist Party is very much involved in trying to think about, how to control possible social unrest. I was in Shanghai in November 2022 when there were protests in the streets denouncing zero COVID, denouncing the Communist Party by name, that these were things that were erupting. And so I very much sign on to Helen's description of AI, that China is leading in the AI of censorship. It is leading in the AI of facial recognition. That right now it looks very much like the US is a place where ordinary consumers can tinker with and play around on a lot of these AI tools, whereas in China is mostly reserving these very powerful tools for its own use, potentially to control society. That right now China is in a moment of economic weakness. This might deteriorate further, this might get a little bit better, but there is always this presence hovering over there that the state security might ramp up its technology, really to make sure that there are no socially destabilizing incidents.
Well, Helen, Dan, thank you so much for being here. It's been great to learn from the both of you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
It's just gone past 8 a.m. across the Emirates, 6 a.m. here in Johannesburg. I'm Jennifer Zabasajat. Let's check in on those markets. Optimism around a potential for an Iran peace deal feeding into the energy sector and across markets more broadly. We're seeing Brent crude down more than 0.5%. We're actually on track for Brent to see its worst monthly drop since 2020. You're seeing Brent trading below $94 a barrel. The Bloomberg dollar marginally up right now. In Asia, tracking the rest of equities, higher, up 1.9%, as we're seeing potential optimism around a peace deal feeding into equities. And we also has NASDAQ 100 futures on there after they did close with a higher peak on Thursday. Let's just get you some other stories. The U.S. and Iran have reached a tentative deal to extend a ceasefire by 60 days and begin further nuclear talks with Tehran. A source says President Trump is yet to agree to the terms. Vice President J.D. Vance says the two sides are going back and forth on some language points, and Tehran appears to be negotiating in good faith. Axios is reporting that the deal includes unrestricted shipping through the Strait of Hormuz.
The teams have been going back and forth. And President Trump has made it very clear, he talked about it at the cabinet meeting, that he has several red lines. And Iran has to turn over their highly enriched uranium. They cannot pursue a nuclear weapon. And the Strait of Hormuz, back to your question on energy, has to free transit. Navigation of the seas has to be free and open as it was before. So he's not going to take a bad deal. He's going to make a great deal for the American people.
Bloomberg has learned that SpaceX is lowering its targeted IPO valuation to at least $1.8 trillion. Sources had earlier told us it was aiming for a valuation above $2 trillion. Elon Musk's company is seeking to raise as much as $75 billion in what could be the biggest IPO of all time. It's expected to start formal marketing as soon as June 4th. Meanwhile, Anthropic has raised $65 billion in its latest funding round, valuing the company at $965 billion, eclipsing its rival OpenAI's value for the first time. Dell shares soared in late trade after its full-year sales outlook far surpassed analyst estimates, fueled by demand for servers that power AI work. The company sees fiscal year revenue reaching about $167 billion, including $60 billion from AI servers. COO Jeff Clark says the AI opportunity shows no signs of slowing down. And those were some of your top headlines. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in Johannesburg. This is Bloomberg.
We're entering the first of 4 factories.
This is one of the cleanest factories in the world.
How clean is clean? Even a single skin cell can actually kill one of our chips that we make here.
Chips like these. The smallest components on today's chips are smaller than the size of a virus, approximately 50,000 times smaller than the width of a human hair. And fragile as they may be, today's most expensive chips sell for upwards of $30,000 each and are reportedly transported in armored vehicles. We're talking about the massive, highly lucrative heartbeat powering the global economy.
1 trillion semiconductor devices are shipped every year. That's 100 devices for every person on Earth.
They are the foundation of economic growth around the world, and it brings together the best scientific minds to push progress forward.
The chip industry is projected to hit $1 trillion in revenue in 2026. And thanks to AI, everyone is talking about it.
Artificial intelligence boom.
My beat went from obscure backwater that people had sort of heard of to being the center of technology.
What is widely considered to be the most complex manufacturing process on Earth is facing the limitations of our physical world.
We're pushing the envelope of technology in multiple directions: software, hardware, chemistry, physics, in all dimensions.
Unprecedented market conditions.
Demand for AI infrastructure is absolutely massive. It appears to be insatiable right now.
Vulnerable choke points.
The modern economy is likely to collapse if something happens to Taiwanese chip ecosystem.
So just how resilient is the industry that requires this many layers of clothing to function?
See?
Right this way. Nestled among windmills and canals, surrounded by charming cottages and cyclists, you will find Europe's most valuable tech firm, well known for
Lithography.
The lithography tools that they create are some of the most fabulously complex and difficult to perfect machines in the world.
ASML doesn't make chips. It makes machines that make chips and offers tech that no other company has been able to recreate. Lithography is a process that directs light through a series of mirrors, lenses, and a special blueprint to transfer patterns onto silicon wafers, essentially shrinking chip designs down to sizes invisible to the human eye and creating the electrical pathways that give a chip its function.
All of the manufacturers of the most advanced chips in the world, whether they say it publicly or not, use ASML's machines or are about to use ASML's machines.
The nano patterning machine is one of the most critical steps in the semiconductor making. People buy new phones because they got more capabilities for the same money. So you must find a way to print much smaller features, but at much higher productivity.
In order to make the next generation of chips even more intricate, ASML literally had to develop a way to generate a type of light that does not naturally occur on Earth's surface, called EUV, extreme ultraviolet. The system is as big as a double-decker bus, weighs as much as a blue whale, and will run customers $400 million per machine.
Why do your machines have to be so big?
That's a good question. First of all, as you want to print smaller resolution, you make the opening angle of the lens bigger.
Bigger lenses can collect more information to squeeze onto the surface of the chips.
The second reason is, in order to have the speed, you need very fast-moving stages.
Litho machines can repeatedly copy a pattern onto a wafer hundreds of thousands of times within about 12 seconds.
The reticle stage can move about 20 G, 4 times more acceleration than the most advanced fighter jets in the world. In order to have that power to accelerate that fast, you need big motors.
The smaller or more complex the chip, the bigger the machine needs to be. There's no avoiding it. All of the world's most advanced litho machines come from ASML. It is one hyper-specialized link in this highly concentrated supply chain that is under more pressure than ever before. All eyes are on the companies at the top and whether they're up for the challenge.
We design the semiconductor products that really drive the leading edge of compute.
This is AMD. Advanced Micro Devices. Worth more than $300 billion, it's a place where engineers fill their thermoses with liquid nitrogen. Where stock prices have been known to triple, AI is hot.
You hear it sizzle all of a sudden?
And occasionally, employees appear out of thin air.
Well, you guys are getting first-hand view of how this works. We're delivering server chips that go into supercomputers, networking chips that connect the world together, on down to the consoles that you use to play your latest games. But the common theme in all of them is they require certain compute capabilities and energy efficiency.
The switches in chips are called transistors. They're sort of like nanoscopic light switches that control the flow of electricity and generate the classic ones and zeros that ultimately make up every piece of digital information in our modern devices. Chips are everywhere. It's how your phone unlocks, your robot vacuum navigates, and how your coffee maker somehow connects to Wi-Fi. Sometimes.
When you think about the modern economy, right, and you think about how goods are produced today, what you recognize is that chips have become ubiquitous. It's very difficult to find anything that you can plug in or that runs on a battery that doesn't have a semiconductor of some form in it.
The stock market loves chips. Sorry, I may be underselling this a bit. The stock market is going absolutely bonkers.
The latest blockbuster AI chips deal with AMD.
I mean, holy moly, Batman, the AI rally and the chip grab, it is on in a big way.
And AMD has turned the demand for AI chips into a new multi-billion-dollar part of its business.
All right, so this is a wafer. This is how we build our products. You can see where all of the various individual chips are printed. So this wafer probably has around 300 or 400 chips printed. And after you singulate them,
a fancy way of saying wafers are chipped into individual chips, which is actually the origin of the term chip.
You have products such as this. This is a chip that would run your PC.
Basic chips are called analog or essential, and they quite simply have more basic functions as sensors or power switches. More advanced chips are referred to as, well, advanced. This could be your run-of-the-mill CPU or GPU, the brains of the computer that are computing and performing more elaborate tasks. The most specialized AI chips are designed to not only run, but create software, to process droves of data in a matter of milliseconds.
Just to see a contrast, you know, this is a PC, this is a server, this is AI, and the amount of silicon is immensely higher. This central region here is actually many chips with some stacked on top of the other. And then the 8 individual chiplets on the outside are our memory, stacked 12 layers high. And so we're able to get more energy efficient AI compute.
Of course, AI is booming. AI chips accounted for more than 1/4 of all chips sold in 2025. That figure is expected to reach more than half by 2029. Chip demand is no longer dictated by which new iPhone or PC will have customers lining up.
What has changed over the years in the semiconductor industry is since we're seeing such a surge in the need to build data centers for AI deployment and applications, we're seeing a more sustained growth period in semiconductors as opposed to the old-fashioned cyclical when we used to have Intel come out with chips that everybody had to upgrade their computer for.
Spending on AI infrastructure, like data centers, is projected to soon cross the $1 trillion mark, so the demand for these chips is there. There's just one maybe not so nanoscopic problem. How concentrated is too concentrated for this supply chain?
Join me each week on Wall Street Week for stories of capitalism from business, markets, economics, tech, and climate. More than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about.
Know how the market day started.
Find out how it finishes.
Public markets to private markets.
From the micro to the macro.
Covering retail, entertainment, the business of sports.
The supply chains, trade policy, how it all is impacting the U.S. equity market as we drive to the closing bell at 4 p.m.
A holistic approach to covering financial markets.
If it matters to your life, we're covering it. I'm Katie Greifeld.
And I'm Romaine Bostic, and this is The Close.
Live every weekday.
Only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Behind those pom-poms and smoke machines are employees for the chip giant TSMC, Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company. As fun as the annual company sports day looks, TSMC's role in the industry is serious business.
Creating semiconductors is the most complicated manufacturing process in the world.
To be fair, it does require a bit of choreography. Making a chip is like building a house of cards with thousands of people located on multiple continents. Everyone must place their card exactly right, delicately balanced at the perfect time, or, well, you know what happens. The majority of chip design happens in the US. Raw silicon wafers are primarily made in Japan and Taiwan, but a few other places as well. A lot of chip-making machinery comes from the Netherlands, of course, the US, and South Korea. Components within those machines are sourced from places like Germany, Japan, and the US. Then, all of those things join forces for manufacturing magic within fabrication facilities, fabs for short, heavily concentrated in Taiwan. TSMC manufactures over 90% of the world's most advanced chips, almost entirely out of its Taiwan-based gigafabs.
A gigafab is a massive chip-making site. It maximizes its output and optimizes its cost.
It created this idea of we can outsource manufacturing, give us your designs and we'll make the best chips. Doesn't matter who's designing them, you're going to TSMC and you're saying, please make this for me.
It's basically the bottleneck of all bottlenecks, smack dab in the middle of a very complex supply chain with no simple alternative.
What's called bringing up a fab, which is basically making a new factory or a new production line operational, requires a lot of experience. And so guess what? If you've got one next door that's already working, why not copy that? The logistics are very much favor building these things in what are called clusters in close proximity to each other.
These clever clusters are also, let's say, precarious.
There are a lot of ways that the supply chain for semiconductors and its broader ecosystem can be destabilized.
Taiwan's strongest earthquake in 25 years.
Disruptive side effects of the COVID pandemic. There is now a global shortage of computer chips.
A supply chain disruption in one place can cause repercussions in the industry far down the line.
To top it off, TSMC is located at the center of a decades-long geopolitical standoff.
Beijing has been ratcheting up pressure, staging its most expansive military drills in decades.
China claims Taiwan is a Chinese territory, while Taiwan maintains its independence. And that doesn't make things feel particularly stable.
There are some concerns about China's plans for the future of Taiwan and whether that could constrain the ability of United States companies to get those chips.
A February 2026 Bloomberg economics report estimates that the world economy could lose $10 trillion if a conflict were to erupt. With Taiwan hanging in the balance, global superpowers are making moves.
The government of the United States has said, hey, guess what? This is strategically important to us. It has massive security implications.
The defense industry needs very highly advanced chips that are impervious, for example, to space radiation, to power satellites and planes and things like this. So there's a defense industry motivation for governments to make sure that there are the right kind of semiconductors produced within their country's borders.
China doesn't feel that it can depend on the U.S. It believes in self-reliance and technological supremacy as well. But basically, it doesn't want to be left out. So it wants to develop its own homegrown chip industry.
And where does Huawei come in?
Well, Huawei is China's national tech champion. It's a company that's known for its hardware prowess. Back in 2019, the U.S. had imposed sanctions on Huawei, basically cutting off its ability to get the components it needs to make its products. And there was a feeling that Huawei was in a lot of trouble.
At the time, China was a late start into chip manufacturing. Less than 10% of the country's chips were being supplied by Chinese companies with less advanced tech than foreign firms, which is at odds with the fact that China is also the world's largest market for chips.
China has a massive middle-class consumer base that it can sell electronics to. So if it could make and develop these capabilities in the chip industry, then it's almost supportable on a domestic basis.
But China has been notoriously secretive about its chip industry.
No one really knew where China stood. We had heard that Huawei was building some chip factories in secret. We identified 3 factories deep in the bowels of Guangdong, and I got the location. And when I got there, I was surprised.
The site was evidence of China's major domestic manufacturing efforts underway to skirt U.S. sanctions.
We all thought that this wasn't possible because you need so much money in order to build these chip plants.
Estimates suggest building a leading-edge chip plant requires at least $30 billion in capital. Nonetheless, in 2023, Huawei shocked the industry with the debut of a China-made advanced chip that proved an unexpectedly rapid development in capability. China has also become the world's biggest producer of analog chips. But Chinese progress in advanced chip making has been stalled by fluctuating U.S. regulation around access to state-of-the-art Western chips and chip technology. ASML's highly coveted advanced lithography machines are among the technologies blocked from being sold to Chinese companies.
China's advantages, they're spending and investing a lot of money in creating their own chips. The Chinese government launched a $50 billion chip fund, allowing a lot of these local chip makers to tap into in order to develop their chip-making capabilities. You also have all these big private tech companies, Alibaba, Tencent, also providing money and support, backing a lot of these startups.
Money is the name of the game. The Chinese government is considering incentives valuing up to an additional $70 billion to support domestic chip making. Meanwhile, the U.S. is still doling out money from the Biden administration's $52 billion 2022 CHIPS Act in a major reshoring effort of its own.
Reshoring means bringing factories back to a certain country so that the physical ability to manufacture semiconductors resides in that country.
In 1990, nearly 40% of the world's chips were manufactured in the U.S. In 2024, it was only about 10%, so the US has ambitions to send that percentage climbing again.
The United States has never been the cheapest place to produce semiconductor components. Our labor costs are high, our regulatory burden is high, but there is an incentive now under the current administration and another prior one, which involves subsidizing the creation of more manufacturing here in the United States.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Burden in London, and these are the stories that set your agenda.
Taking you from the U.S. market's close to the overnight session in Asia, we'll walk you through what you need to know to kickstart Europe's trading day. Live from our European headquarters, we bring you the day's top market-moving stories, unmatched expert analysis, and on-the-ground reporting from across the continent. Tune in to Daybreak Europe, only on Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to the opening trade.
Watch Bloomberg Tech.
This is the Asia trade.
This is Wall Street Week. Welcome to Balance of Power.
You're watching Bloomberg Deals. Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend.
This is Bloomberg Television.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute global news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Joanna Bersachi in El Ola, Saudi Arabia, and this is Bloomberg.
About 7,000 miles from the TSMC gigafabs in Taiwan, there is a site, or collection of sites, that have earned a name inspired by none other than the birthplace of chip innovation. Welcome to the Silicon Desert.
This place, a few years ago, it used to be desert. And in a few years, we will have a little city here of fabs. Everything will start being like a science fiction, highly automated, producing thousands of wafers very soon.
On the one hand, the desert is good for chip fabs. Low humidity, decreased risk of earthquakes and floods, cheap land, and, of course, some tax incentives. On the other, the chip infrastructure has to be built up from scratch. To date, TSMC is committed to investing $165 billion in the Arizona fabs and is scheduled to receive $6.6 billion in direct funding from the CHIPS Act. As TSMC makes a splash with its first operations on U.S. soil, major expansion efforts are also underway by the OG American chip company. Do you know the one? Think back to your high school backpack.
There's a better way for everyone. From the company that invented the integrated circuit, Texas Instruments, the better way keeps getting better.
Everybody says, oh, the calculator company, right? And the reality is we do so much more than that. Our foundational chips are the backbone of essentially all modern technology as we know it.
Okay, so the calculators are cool, but this Texas Instruments story is about a different equation.
If it plugs into the wall or has a battery, it very likely has one TI chip in it. We have 15 manufacturing sites globally, and these manufacturing sites work together to provide tens of billions of chips every year globally to our customers. And for perspective, that's tens of thousands of chips coming out of TI globally every single minute.
That is a whopping 100,000 customers and 80,000 products. TI makes the kind of chips that perform more simple tasks, like sensing temperature to prevent overheating, or managing power as it moves through a device. The chips that keep our technology safe and running smoothly.
One of the most important things about the industry that you have to understand is its volume economics. Making a lot of chips as cheap as you can and selling them for as much as you can is the way towards victory.
Some of TI's chips sell for just a few cents each. They're cheaper and easier to make than today's leading advanced AI chips, meaning it's cost-effective to utilize lower-tier or even hand-me-down production equipment. But the company has made the countercurrent decision to invest $60 billion in advanced chip manufacturing tech.
We're actually in the sub-fab. The clean room will be just above us.
The details all come back to those shiny wafers.
Maybe you can come here and help me hold this, please?
This is a 200mm wafer, the size used by most analog chip companies. This is a 300mm wafer, primarily used for more advanced chip manufacturing. These are TI's big bet.
So going from 200 to 300 millimeter increases the surface area on the wafer by 2.3 times.
Meaning 2.3 times the number of chips.
So when you look here, there's kind of a collection of different chips, and you can see everything from, really big products here all the way to the very small, tiny ones.
Pause. Now that's thinking. Those are chips.
Yeah, it's quite amazing, isn't it? I think if I picked it up, you wouldn't be able to see it. I think it's about the size of a pepper flake, and in fact, very glittery.
At that scale, 2.3 times the number of chips could mean a competitive advantage of hundreds of thousands more chips per wafer.
So from this vantage point, you can get a sense of scale of this site. This will be TI's largest mega site. Over 5.5 million square feet, the same square footage as 2 Empire State Buildings. Wow. It's a huge site, mega site.
While TI doesn't make AI chips, it's hoping the current landscape propels demand for its essential chip business.
I think what we're seeing in terms of the growth and expansion of the whole industry is a mixture. We always have the nuts and bolts chips, but we also have AI pulling along those nuts and bolts chips too, because you can't build a server for a data center without some lower end, cheaper chips that do some of the grunt work, if you like.
I'm bloody freezing.
All right, get into those warm bunny suits.
So we're going into the first part of the clean room that hasn't had equipment installed yet, is that correct?
Yeah, we're entering into the north side of the first of 4 factories here in Sherman, Texas. This factory is 100% automated. On the ceiling, we will have over 15 miles of automated track. Each one of those cars carries material around the factory. Bringing up a 300 millimeter factory has the most advanced manufacturing equipment in the world.
Texas Instruments projects this site will soon produce hundreds of millions of chips every single day. If all of this investment pays off in the margins, TI will increase its lead as the #1 global supplier of analog chips and prove advanced manufacturing's value for even the tiniest ones.
A couple of decades ago, chips in general were servicing behind the scenes. Today, I would say chips actually define infrastructure. They define communications or people mobility or defense or AI.
From the chips powering our devices to the fabs where they're made, the industry is experiencing pervasive change. The demand from AI and our ever more technologically dependent world is forcing a global rethink of the fundamental building blocks. But one thing is for certain. Innovation is underway.
We might be looking at the news and seeing politics take center stage or other disruptions. Be aware that companies are going to be focused on investing in the new product, in the new design, in how to save on costs. They're going to be focused on innovation if they're doing things correctly.
For years, this industry was mired in this win or loss brutal economics, trudged towards the future, and now we're seeing all kinds of excitement of people talking about chips in a new way.
Plain and simple, the chip industry is evolving to meet the moment, and it's...
Am I allowed to say the word sexy?
Why, yes, you absolutely are. Oh, hello there. Just wanted to say, Primer is back. We've been scouring the frontiers of science and technology to help explain the difference between the next gold rush and whatever this thing is. And in Season 2, we're upping the stakes. More danger.
Now that is some high-grade uranium mineralization.
We used to have a stable climate on this Earth. Right now, we do not.
More science.
We're pushing the envelope of technology in multiple directions. Software, hardware, chemistry, physics.
The cable is, very cold.
And more CEOs that can nail the photo shoot.
Hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars are at stake.
While the problems are economic, the solutions are too.
And yes, we will be talking about AI.
There is a lot of humanoid hype out there.
But our future doesn't run on hype. It runs on innovation. Watch Season 2 on all these lovely channels.
U.S. jobs numbers are released. Bloomberg has the report under surveillance with crucial data and expert analysis at terminal speed. Nobody covers Jobs Day like Bloomberg.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute political news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Tyler Kendall in Washington, and this is Bloomberg.
It's 8:30 a.m. across the Emirates, 6:30 a.m. here in Johannesburg. I'm Jennifer Zapasadra. Let's check in on those markets. Optimism around a potential agreement between Iran and the U.S. feeding into markets. Right now, we're seeing a Brent crude down just over 1.1% there. Brent on set for its worst monthly drop since 2020. The Bloomberg Dollar Index holding steady. MSCI Asia Pacific Index up just over 2% there. Bucking the trend, though, S&P futures down just marginally today. Let's look at our top story. The U.S. and Iran have reached a tentative deal to extend a ceasefire by 60 days and begin further nuclear talks with Tehran. A source says President Trump is yet to agree to the terms. Vice President J.D. Vance says the two sides are going back and forth on some language points, and Tehran appears to be negotiating in good faith. Axios is reporting that the deal includes unrestricted shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Congo's health minister has pushed back against claims the country's Ebola outbreak is out of control, calling that view alarmist. The WHO has warned that insecurity and population displacement are undermining tracement of most suspected contacts. Latest data show more than 900 suspected cases and 223 suspected deaths. And South Africa's central bank has raised borrowing costs for the first time since 2023 and suggested more tightening may be needed if the Iran war drags on. The 6-member Monetary Policy Committee lifted the benchmark rate by 25 basis points to 7%. It also lifted its inflation projection for 2026 to 4.4%, up from 3.7%. And Daybreak Europe starts in half an hour. This is Bloomberg.
Was definitely ruthless about killing the complexity and the drag in the bank. There is massive potential in this bank. Some of it needed to be unleashed. Things don't become complex by design. They end up becoming complex by lack of focus. We needed to be agile. So bringing the focus at the simplification will allow you to start dealing with it.
I'm Francine Lacroix, and this is Leaders, the podcast that explores what drives the world's most influential minds. Joining me this week is George Alhedri, the chief executive of HSBC, one of the world's biggest banks. He's been in the top job since September of 2024 and not shied away from difficult decisions, including a huge restructure, slashing thousands of jobs. While some might consider his methods ruthless, HSBC's share price has responded positively. It's roughly doubled to a record high since Alhedri took over. And after an eventful first year, I wanted to catch up with him and dig into those management decisions, understand how he's evolved as a leader, and hear how he's thinking about AI. Georges, thank you so much for speaking to us.
Great to be with you, Francine.
We were counting how many languages you spoke. 8?
So I've studied 8 languages. Other people should judge if I speak them.
Do you have a love for languages?
I'm fascinated by languages.
Because
if you're fascinated by cultures, then you're fascinated by understanding how they think and how they express themselves. And that basically naturally links you to understanding their language.
Can you only be a good leader if you understand people?
I think you have to definitely listen. And if you can listen in their own language, then even better.
You grew up in Lebanon?
Yes.
And what was your early childhood like?
So I grew up in Lebanon. At age 18, I moved to France for my university. I then picked an internship in Germany. And by coincidence, I ended up doing an internship in banking. So I went back to Paris to finish my postgraduate degree in finance, statistics, and economics, because I enjoyed it, of course. And I picked up my first job in Japan. And then back to London at that time, up until the time where HSBC hired me, and that was exactly 20 years ago.
At the time, you wanted to be an engineer. So what attracted you to finance?
So I absolutely wanted to be an engineer. I studied as an engineer, and as you know, back to your question about languages, I had studied German for about 10 or 12 years at that time. So I wanted to do an internship in Germany. The only internship I managed to land was an internship on the trading floor in Frankfurt. So I took it, and then I got addicted to it.
What did you like about it?
I like the pace. I like the still, at that time, remember, there's a lot of financial engineering. So you're still using a lot of your engineering skills. It still happens, right? And all sorts of, it's highly transferable to finance. I liked the accountability. I like the early responsibility you can get. So this is where it started.
George, did you always want to be a leader? Were you a leader as a child?
It's difficult to define what a leader is, especially if leader as a child. If it's a matter of living up with high standards and high values and high integrity, and being able to project that around you, then yes, that started very early with me. But there are certain traits in leadership that really resonate with me. The first one is you lead by example. You walk the talk. You demonstrate that things apply to you as they would apply to anybody else that you expect them to be applied to, and you don't never make an exception for yourself.
When you look at leadership, how does, I guess, the young formative years, give you a sense of who you will become?
You learn and you feel what is right and what is not right. And a number of people around you, including my direct family, my parents, it kind of form part of how you think and what ethical standards you set yourself and the integrity by which you operate. And then sometimes around you, you feel things aren't right or aren't fair. And it's very important to stand your line, to hold your line.
That's difficult. How do you do that?
It is difficult. Discipline. It's very important to hold the discipline, and it's very important to think of yourself as your own brand. If you want your own brand to remain the brand of integrity, then it's very important you stick to it.
I've heard, some chief executives see it as, they decided from very early on who they did not want to be. Is it choosing who you do not want to be or who you want to be? What's easiest?
I think both go hand in hand. It's very important to realize who you want to be, and by comparison, realize also what are the traits you absolutely do not appreciate, do not regard, and therefore that you want to stay away from.
Talk to me about your favorite pre-CEO job at HSBC. Do you have, a place in the world where you really kind of had to hone in on your leadership skills and understand the culture?
I've spent 20 years at HSBC now, and there isn't a single geography on the planet where I spend that long. So there is a sense of belonging for me to HSBC that supersedes any kind of physical attachment to any place. With HSBC, I've been, I don't know if I can count now, however many dozens and dozens and dozens of times, probably hundreds, to places like Hong Kong, one of the two HSBC home markets, the Middle East, where I spent many years for HSBC, specifically in Dubai, but also roving around the whole of the Middle East, Europe, of course, the US, the Asia, as a whole. It's just amazing the opportunities you have to get there. And every time you're there, you spend time, you create more connections, you have an even deeper understanding. If I bring 10 people in a room and I ask them how many geographies they worked for HSBC, you would find people who tell you more than 10. That kind of experience, frankly, is unique.
But George, if you look at, for example, some of the Wall Street banks, they're more cutthroat, but they pay their people a lot more. Is that something that you worry about?
It's very important that we reward our people fairly, we reward our people competitively, and we reward performance. But that's not the only component. The other component is what is the environment in which they operate? Who are their colleagues, their bosses? What is their purpose? Who are they serving? Why they're serving them? Can they be their true selves? Can they operate with the highest integrity standards as they wish to? All of that kind of form part of the value proposition HSBC offers its employees. And this is what makes the kind of equation collectively work for all our colleagues.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute geopolitical news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in the Lesotho Highlands, and this is Bloomberg.
At 9:30 a.m., the market tells you what it's really thinking.
We beat the drum to the opening bell.
With deep analysis of the forces driving the price action.
Focusing investors on what really matters.
Where the money flows, which markets are changing.
Conversations with players shaping the narrative.
Innovative growth companies gravitate to NASDAQ.
It's not just like, let's buy the Mag 7 or AI.
That's a really compelling story.
This is where your trading day begins.
And this is Open Interest.
Only on Bloomberg.
Everybody has to make decisions, big or small. But not everyone runs a bank with 200,000 employees. When Al-Hedri took over as CEO, he really wasted no time making his mark, ushering in a big restructure and laying off thousands of people. So I was curious to understand how he thinks about company-wide challenges and what gave him the courage to move so fast and so decisively. So George, talk to me about when you get the call that you've been appointed chief executive. What's your first thought?
Of course, the first thought is to be humbled and honored for being given this fantastic responsibility. But what really mattered for me is what I can do for this bank, not who I was or what my title was in this bank. Now, it so happens there's a lot you can do as a group CEO. In terms of affecting change or affecting, bringing potential to the bank. So it was therefore the great kind of opportunity for me to be able to do what I really set out to do and what I had the full support of the board to do.
But you moved fast, right? You got appointed and then you actually said, does a chief executive need to move fast to kind of say, right, this is the change and this is what we need to be? And is it all on you or did you govern by consensus?
So a few things on that, Francine. The first one is there is massive potential in this bank. Some of it needed to be unleashed. It needed to be unlocked. And some of that unlocking of the potential had to go through re-engineering of certain of our aspects, re-engineering the bank, rewiring the bank so that we can unlock this potential. Then, having been in the bank 20 years, operating in a number of geographies and businesses and functions myself, I've built a lot of experience and a very large network of colleagues who have been also feeding their input and their concerns, which kind of forms a big set of kind of action book, if you want. And then third, very importantly, I was already sitting at the board as a group CFO before I took the CEO role. And all these conversations I was having with my board. And if you have the support of the board, you, of course, have the kind of right to be able to act quickly.
But what was the most difficult thing about that first restructuring plan? Because you have to get rid of units that maybe you're attached to, having worked here for so long. There's, people that you like that maybe you've had to move around. Again, was it intellectual or, are you ruthless about it?
I was definitely ruthless about killing the complexity and the drag in the back. The most difficult part is when you have to separate with some of your colleagues. I think we've been very thoughtful. We've been very considerate. We've done it, hopefully, the right way and the most respectful way for the benefit, ultimately, of the firm and its customers. We needed to be agile. We needed to be, to be ready for a modern world. And to be that, we needed to be simple. And therefore, kind of everything then drives what decisions you take from that mission statement.
How did the bank become so complex? And again, this is something that actually most organizations have to face as they grow. I guess there's, various factions, or a lot of companies actually could just become much more simple and simplified. What did you see?
Entropy is a feature. Entropy tends to increase, which means complexity, if you do nothing about it, tends to increase rather than decrease. So things don't become complex by design. They end up becoming complex by lack of focus. So bringing the focus at the simplification will allow you to start dealing with it. That's the first observation. Second observation is you have to be extremely methodical. What has created the complexity? How can it be addressed methodically? Try to identify ways to be simple. Some of the ways to be simple is to decide not to do certain things, and this is why we exited a number of activities. The third thing is when you're taking structured decisions, you have to start from the top down. You can't take structured decisions from the bottoms up. This is why the first decision structurally I've taken relates to simplifying the group operating committee, We moved from more than 20 people to about 12. More importantly, we moved from 0% single accountability. Everything had dual or multiple accountability to now about 60% of our revenue is generated under single accountability. So that's important. And then the last thing, Francine, is to be patient. Because it's not going to, we're not solving simplification overnight. It's going to be a journey, and we have to be relentless at that journey, quarter after quarter, month after month, until we get the desired outcomes. And that journey is still on, like we're not there yet.
But as a big chief executive of a big bank, you basically have, the shareholders that you need to please. So simplification maybe helps with them understanding what the bank wants to become. You have your clients, and then you also have the employees. So how difficult is it to juggle these, the three masters?
So there is one consideration which, fortunately, the three masters align on, is being best at what you do. Your customers want you to be the best at what you serve them with. Customers tick. Your shareholders will pay you for what you're best at doing. They won't give you valuation for something that you're average. They will give you valuation for where you really command, where you're an authority in being able to provide that service or that product in that market. So the shareholders align to be the best. And then our colleagues want to be the best. Our colleagues want to win. Our colleagues are in a competitive landscape, and they want to win. And they basically thrive when we're delivering the best we can, and when we're delivering best outcomes, and we're basically the best at what we do. So you take this as a guiding thread and you say, let's focus on that. Focus where we can grow in areas where we're the most competitively advantaged. And then everybody aligns, colleagues, clients, and shareholders.
Is that why you learned Mandarin? You wanted to be the best for HSBC?
Yeah, I don't think I'm the best at HSBC speaking Mandarin. That's far from it.
But you're the first CEO to speak Mandarin.
Possibly, yes. I think what is important is to gain access to understanding, the culture in which HSBC operates. And obviously one of the very important cultures within HSBC as a whole, but that is probably one of the least understood for, say, people living in London, like I'm living now, is understanding the Chinese culture. And, if you really want to understand the Chinese way of thinking, the way of reasoning, the way of negotiating or engaging or presenting simply, then there is no better way than kind of put the pain in trying to learn the language and see how it's done in the language.
It was quite bold because you took a sabbatical for it. Was it a difficult decision, or did you automatically know this was the right way to also service your clients?
First, I knew if I really wanted to make a leapfrog in my early starts in Mandarin, it needed much more time than I could give it. Now I'm proud to say I still take lessons. Whether I'm progressing or not, I don't know, but I'm still taking lessons. I'm maintaining that journey. But there needed to be a leapfrog at the start, which a sabbatical has helped.
Was it for yourself or was it for the bank? Because it's interesting. It was Mandarin and nothing and not something else.
No, well, look, I mean, I've taken 6 months out, and there are a number of things I achieved during those 6 months. Some of them personal, some of them professional. But yes. It was full on.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm David Gura.
I'm Lisa Mateo.
And I'm Christina Ruffini. We're tracking breaking news today from Wall Street to Washington.
Let's start overseas. The sector is really propelling this deal forward.
Yeah, the hope is this will open up new markets and provide some additional liquidity.
Of course, now they're going to have competitors. We got a big week coming up in politics.
Earnings season is underway. We're going to get some key reports.
Everything you need to know before the markets open on Monday.
Introducing Bloomberg This Weekend, bringing a little Bloomberg into your weekend routine.
Guys, buckle up.
When news breaks,
A redhead across the Bloomberg terminal.
Bloomberg has you covered.
Trump's global tariffs are struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court.
For all the context and clarity you need.
There's going to be now tons of tariff headlines until midterm elections.
Hear it first on Bloomberg. Get your fixed income fix. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield around the world right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
The future is AI, and in our conversation, El-Hedry made that very evident. But bringing colleagues along for the ride is one of his new leadership challenges. Talk to me about, in simple terms, right, how you see the bank in 5 years.
The world is moving fast. We need to move fast. Our customers are moving fast. We need to move fast. Their needs today will be different tomorrow. Their goals today will be different tomorrow. And we need to be continuously adapting to their evolving needs and their evolving goals, right? There are a few key components that can achieve this. Most importantly, the first component is the human touch, okay? We're still in a very much believer in a model where there'll always be a person to talk to. So we invest in our relationship management. We invest in our, people skills and capabilities. We invest in our people, simply.
So we're not being replaced by AI.
So that's the second component, is we absolutely need to be innovation ready and embrace it and enable our capabilities and be able to embrace a number of emerging payments through blockchain or tokenized deposit, all of which we launched, by the way, but that's an evolving world. But also being, Gen AI ready in particular. I mean, AI has been with us for 15 years, but Gen AI is clearly bringing something new to the equation. Now we have more than 100 cases, of which about half of them are already live in production, that are transformational, and they're going to change the way we as humans operate. And while we as humans will not be replaced by AI, if we don't know how to embrace it and upskill ourselves using it, we will become obsolete. So this is why my call to our colleagues has been to bring all of them along the journey of how can we best use Gen AI opportunities, because for those who don't use them, there is a real risk that they will be displaced. But those who will use them are going to be part of the future.
But if you're a young kid today and you want to get into banking, what do you study?
Let me try to answer it with two-pronged approach. The first one, Gen AI specific, right? We now rolled to 170,000 of our colleagues internal productivity tools that can materially improve their capabilities of reading documents, reading emails, writing documents, emails, querying, challenging, thought process. 170,000 of our employees. I mean, soon all the way to the 200,000+ employees. Of course, I will be monitoring usage. I'll be monitoring super usage. Those will be the most, kind of influencing among their colleagues to drive the utilization. But utilization is not optional, because that's how people remain very relevant in the future workforce 5 years down the road. But we're using Gen AI in wealth, we're using Gen AI in markets, we're using Gen AI in contact centers, we're using Gen AI, of course, in technology. Now 30,000 of our technologists, engineers are enabled with Gen AI. The speed at which we're able to patch for, say, code weaknesses or kind of vulnerabilities is 10 times faster already now than it was the case last year. 10 times. And we're not talking
in 12 months.
In 12 months. We're not talking some productivity in 5 years. We're talking productivity already here. This is hugely transformational. So you can imagine how important it is. Now I go back to the first part of your question, Francine, is what are the skills that are needed for banks? I would say there is no one particular skill that's going to be critical, but it is going to be the ability to learn. Because you can come in a bank coming from an engineering background, from a technology background, from an accounting background. But once you're in the bank, your career, the customer's expectation are such that you're going to have to continuously learn. And if you think you know it all, then there is no place for those, in an evolving landscape. Today, the most important learning capability is how to best embrace Gen AI and innovation in general.
Are you surprised that these, tariffs and trade barriers that have been erected really in 2025 haven't had that much of a material impact?
So a couple of things here, Francine, that are interesting. The first one is tariff in and of themselves aren't a new feature of global trade. They've always was forms of trade. What was more new in 2025 is the speed at which both tariffs have been erected, but also deals have been negotiated to reduce tariffs or remove tariffs. So that was kind of the new feature. What's also important to note is that, yes, trade found its way, and we've seen trade patterns between between Asia and the Middle East, or within Asia, or to some extent also between Asia and Europe, that have outgrown some of the corridors that have taken, that have been slower in terms of trade growth, or that have taken a kind of setback in terms of trade growth. What's most important with these reconfiguration of trade patterns is that, based on our internal research, we believe the kind of addition to GDP that these new trade patterns within Asia will bring to Asia will 3 times more than offset the loss of GDP that will be, due to the reduction of trade with the US. So there is clearly, value creation when we see Asia buying Asia, and these trade patterns and these trade corridors grow, because they're driving not only trade, but they're driving FDI, they're driving employment, they're driving domestic growth as much as it is trade growth.
George, I mean, this year, the next couple of years seems to be much more complicated because of geopolitics. You have this massive fight between the US and China, Europe somewhere in the middle, the UK has to find its footing. How difficult is it to navigate geopolitics as HSBC CEO?
So look, there is always a guiding North Star in managing international kind of relations, is what do our customers need from us? Because at the end of the day, whatever we're doing it because we have customers asking us to help them with, or to deliver it for them, right? So as long as you believe on this planet, we will have loads and loads and loads and loads of international customers who are looking for supply chains around the planet, who are looking for resilience in their supply chains around the planet, who are also looking for consumer markets for their product and services around the planet to scale their capabilities, then HSBC has a critical role to play.
All right, rapid fire. Your top tips for holding highly effective meetings.
Make decisions. A poor decision is always better than no decision, because you can always change a poor decision and align it and adapt it. No decision leads to paralysis.
How do you overcome self-doubt or imposter syndrome?
Always go to first principles. What is your mission, and is what you're doing aligned to your mission? There are various leadership principles I live by. An important one is great leaders build better leaders. Am I on that journey? And do I have great leaders around me that I'm helping build?
What honest advice do you try to impart someone you identify with having great potential?
Enjoy it. You can't be too worked out in knots around things. It's very important to always step back, a deep breath, and just do it the way that you feel you're enjoying it, because you'll be much more impactful.
I love that. Have fun along the way, right? Georges, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Francine. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
A cidade estava sitiada.
Isso ao começo eu tremia, não sabia o que fazer. Foi a mais terrível que eu passei na minha vida.
Eu temo, que o Brasil se torne, num futuro próximo, um narco-estado.
Porque no final, tudo é dinheiro.
People back home there, they are suffering. And someone is driving a Range Rover with their money. Where is my money?
I think she's a scam up to now.
It's some of the world's most desperate people who are getting ripped off.
Repeat after me. I am a winner.
I didn't know how big it was. I didn't really understand what I was getting myself into.
If you tell me you have a vision of being $1 billion business, then you're going to have to do what it takes. And if you're not going to do that, everybody's going to suffer.
Una batalla a muerte.
Money can do a lot of good. It can really transform people's lives, but it can also hurt them.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute space news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Ed Ludlow at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and this is Bloomberg.
Welcome to the world of decentralized finance.
Why is it that NFTs have not recovered in the same way that, say, Bitcoin has?
Bloomberg is covering all things crypto.
It's a pretty spectacular story.
The people.
This is the future. This is the 21st century economy.
The transactions.
It snapped up nearly $1 billion of Bitcoin.
And the technology.
We need to build a digital Fort Knox.
That gives people financial freedom, and that's a wonderful thing.
That's extraordinary.
We ride the wave that is Bitcoin.
Bloomberg Crypto, only on Bloomberg. It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. ETF IQ, only on Bloomberg.
Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Byrne with your top stories. The US and Iran reach a tentative deal to extend their ceasefire for 60 days, subject to approval from President Trump. A tech rally in Asia and Iran optimism power global stocks to a new record high. Brent crude set for its weakest month in 6 years. And Bloomberg learns that SpaceX has trimmed $200 billion from its valuation target as it prepares to launch next month's blockbuster IPO. Well, a very good morning. 6 a.m. here in London. This is the picture in markets. Global stocks at all-time highs on the US-Iran deal. Asian stocks up more than 2% this morning, and futures pointing higher on both sides of the Atlantic, coming off fresh record highs already on Wall Street. Now, if we flip the board over to the cross-asset picture, as you would expect, given the geopolitics, you've got oil lower by more than 1% as things stand. Brent at $92.58 the barrel. Treasuries up across the curve, yields down 1 basis point on the 10-year at 4.43, and the dollar trading in a narrow range after declining yesterday, and traders really awaiting details of this deal. Now, in terms of the other risk events on the docket for today, at 7:45 a.m. onwards, we're going to get the latest May inflation data across Europe, expected to tick up for France and Italy and hold stable in Spain and Germany. And then we've got loads of central bank speak to bring you today. So from the Fed, we'll hear from Mickey Bowman and Jeffrey Schmidt, and from the ECB, we'll hear from Dimitar Radev and Madis Muller. A busy Friday. Let's set you up for the day ahead. We begin with the US and Iran having reached a tentative deal to extend the ceasefire by 60 days and to begin further nuclear talks with Iran. A source says that President Trump is yet to agree to the terms, however, and Vice President J.D. Vance says the two sides are going back and forth on some of the language points, to Iran appearing to be negotiating in good faith. Let's get more now with Bloomberg's John Herskovitz. John, good morning. Tell us just how close really are we to a deal this time?
Yeah, it seems like we're always close to a deal and the deal doesn't materialize. This time we have a lot of positive indications, this memorandum of understanding, as you said, the extension of the ceasefire by 60 days, the language being worked out. So, the signs are there, the markets are taking it positively, but it's a really complex issue. There's so many things that are part of this, but there is this memorandum that both sides are talking about. Whether it actually comes to fruition is another matter. We've been here last week with Marco Rubio saying that perhaps the deal would be a few days away. The deal right around the corner has been there for some time. We may be closer than we've been before, but again, a deal has been elusive.
So we know the sticking points. We've talked about them many times throughout the week. The Strait of Hormuz, the nuclear file, frozen assets, Lebanon. What progress do we seem to have seen on those key sticking points, John, to get to this point?
Yeah, I think that we're looking at possible compromises instead of permanent solutions. For example, like with the Strait of Hormuz, one of the key issues will be like the sequencing of events. How much Iran opens, and that will be met by the U.S. lifting its blockade of Iranian ports. And also demining is something that the U.S. is demanding of Iran, and how the U.S. reciprocates. So there's a lot of trust building that goes on with this. The nuclear issue is really contentious. How it will be worked out is just difficult to say. What will happen to the highly enriched uranium? The disposal of this is something which has been in negotiations. But if there are questions about whether Iran could reconstitute its nuclear program, something that's of great concern. So, there's we can maybe find some things that just get the ball rolling, but the long-term permanent solutions seem to be deferred, and we may have to see these negotiations further down the road to reach some sort of resolution.
Okay, Bloomberg's John Herskovitz. We keep our fingers crossed. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend. And these developments, of course, put Brent on track for its biggest monthly drop since 2020 on the optimism that flows through the Strait of Hormuz may resume. Let's go now to our Asia energy reporter, Stephen Stapczynski, for that perspective. So, Stephen, I do have to wonder what we need to see specifically when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz for this drop in oil to be sustained. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. I think there are going to be two things. So one on the deal-making side and one on the physical flow side. So on the deal-making side, I mean, clearly if there is language about this opening up, if there is any movement, perhaps if the Trump administration says that they're going to remove their blockade, then maybe we might see some movement by the Iranians to also do the same on their basically de facto blockade. So as long as this 60-day ceasefire continues with some sort of agreement to remove restrictions to the Strait of Hormuz, that would be, I think, key. Now, then after that, the market will be closely watching whether or not you see an increase in shipments, right? A lot of the ships going through Hormuz go through dark. A lot of them are connected to Iran or have connections with countries that have brokered deals with Iran. So, for example, Pakistan was able to get some liquefied natural gas shipments through the Strait of Hormuz because there was a deal between Islamabad and Tehran to let that happen. But if you see less restrictions, so other ships for countries that haven't been making these deals, if you're seeing less ships going dark to go through, and if you see an uptick in traffic, those would all be positive signs. We have seen a bit of an uptick. It goes up and down. Iran says that there was one day recently that was 33 ships that went through Hormuz. That would have been the highest since the war started, but it's still far below where you would have been pre-war, which was 135 ships or more on a daily basis. So that's the big question. How long does it take to get those ships back to those levels? And will ship owners, the crews on the ships, and insurers, will they all be comfortable going through even if there is a extension of the ceasefire?
And then when you factor in the damage to infrastructure that we've seen through this war and the tightness that we've seen in the US market highlighted by the data this week, what's the longer term outlook for the oil market then, Stephen?
I mean, there are some analysts who are saying if things were to go back to normal over the next few weeks, which might still be difficult, you are still facing a tighter potential deficit for the rest of the year, and then that kind of goes away into early next year. But there are a lot of things that do need to change. Some facilities have had to ramp down production. They've been damaged, and not just in oil either. I'm thinking about the world's biggest liquefied natural gas export facility at Ras Laffan in Qatar. 17% of that facility's capacity has been damaged, and Qatar itself said that it would take 3 to 5 years to repair that. So getting back to pre-war levels, yeah, the ships can go through, but there are facilities that either have to come back and resume production, and that can take time. It requires maintenance, or they were damaged, and that requires repairs, like you see at the LNG plant in Qatar. So that does mean that even if there is a peace deal, even if there is a resumption of traffic, even if all those things were to happen, it doesn't mean that the oil is flowing and the gas is flowing to the same level that we saw in February.
OK, so the inflation hangover may yet continue. Stephen, thank you for the update. That's Bloomberg's Stephen Stapczynski. Well, hopes for a US-Iran peace deal are also pushing stocks higher to end the month, with a global stock benchmark hitting a fresh all-time high. Let's go now to Bloomberg MLive strategist David Savage for more. David, it feels like we've been here before. Are these latest headlines going to be able to keep this rally going? Because I'm looking at US futures only flat to the upside this morning.
Good morning. I think that's right. I mean, I think I think the first thing is the AI trade has largely been untethered from geopolitical developments. Incremental moves lower in oil prices have helped, broaden the rally. So if we look here in Asia Pacific, most sectors are higher on the session. A majority of stocks are higher. In a region that's really been driven by a singular theme and a very narrow set of stocks. But yeah, if you look at European and U.S. futures, it's a little bit more muted. But overall, I think equity markets and you can see it in front month crude prices, have certainly leaned into the optimism that we are moving towards some sort of agreement. Really, from a market's perspective, the focus is reinstating energy flows through the Strait of Hormuz. So if that's where sort of the priority goes, certainly optimism is picking up. But I think, again, the equity rally has been really leaning on the AI trade. And for the most part, it's been fairly untethered from the geopolitical developments.
I also just want to get your thoughts on the inflation surprise we got out of Japan overnight. Tokyo CPI rising at its slowest pace in 4 years. How does that not derail Bank of Japan hike expectations?
I think at this stage, the Bank of Japan's probably going to look through this single print. I think there's enough evidence that higher oil prices, higher commodity prices are going to continue to push inflation pressures higher moving forward. The policy rate already is very low, and so there's already been concerns that they're behind the curve. And the weaker yen also feeds higher import prices and therefore inflation. And I think there's certainly a risk that a lot of the conflict-related upward pressure on inflation is incoming, right? Shortages in terms of commodity or shortages in terms of fertilizer all will put incremental pressure on food prices and inflation overall. And so markets have started to certainly price a hike in June. But have been unwilling to make that a certainty. I think odds are about 80%. Traders have been left disappointed before, but I think it's going to be hard for them to walk that back at this stage.
Okay, David Savage, Bloomberg MLive strategist, thank you very much. And we're going to continue the central bank's conversation later on in the programme. And Kita Amajuri from Pantheon Macroeconomics is going to join us. And we'll talk about the supply shocks in Europe. We'll wait for the latest inflation data and really whether a US-Iran peace deal should derail a June hike from the ECB, as the market's expecting will be on the table. But first, we'll talk tech. Rising demand for artificial intelligence servers seeing Dell soar after releasing its annual sales outlook. So that's next. This is Bloomberg.
Join me each week on Wall Street Week for stories of capitalism from business, markets, economics, tech, and climate. More than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about.
At a time when policy in Washington is driving Wall Street, we draw a distinction between the rhetoric and the action, bringing you market-moving guests and original reporting. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Middle East tensions are high.
Both sides willing to go back to the battlefield.
The narrative changes moment to moment.
Is there a ceasefire? Is there not a ceasefire? Markets are up, markets are down.
Count on Bloomberg for up-to-the-minute reporting.
Breaking news this morning.
Breaking news in the last few minutes.
On-the-ground perspective.
Talking to you from the bomb shelter.
This White House still pushing.
And the analysis you need to make informed decisions fast.
Clearly, nothing is final until it's well and truly final.
The really important question is whether we'll get second-round effects.
Nobody covers geopolitics like Bloomberg.
Astonishing day for US technology.
Shaping the region's technology ecosystem.
Asia's biggest tech news and innovation.
Dramatic scenes from a Florida launch pad where Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket exploded in a massive fireball while undergoing a test. It's a major setback to the firm backed by Jeff Bezos and its effort to challenge a dominant SpaceX. Blue Origin said that the rocket experienced a, quote, anomaly during the test, adding that all personnel have been accounted for and are safe. Well, let's speak now to our Bloomberg Global Defence editor, Jerry Doyle, for more. So, Jerry, we've been looking at this footage of the blast. What more do we know?
Well, at this point, it's still not clear exactly what caused the explosion. It was on the pad for a static fire test, which is what we call a test of a rocket's engine without it leaving the pad. Something went wrong down there. The rocket was fully fueled. Something sparked the fuel, and the result was a huge explosion. Now, because the explosion was so violent, it will probably take some time to determine what the technical reason for the blast was, but after that investigation, you can expect that Blue Origin will do its best to put those lessons to good use and try to make sure something this dramatic doesn't happen again.
Well, of course, it comes as Bloomberg understands that SpaceX is lowering its IPO price. Jerry, does that mean that the Blue Origin explosion would have an impact on the rivalry between the two companies?
I mean, it could. Both of them are vying for U.S. government contracts. Obviously, SpaceX already puts a lot of national security payloads in orbit. They're both companies are very involved with the Artemis moon exploration program. Blue Origin and contract to land NASA rovers on the moon. It was preparing to take up some satellites for Amazon.com for a rival satellite network to SpaceX Starlink. So you can see the parallels, the levels of competition here. And certainly, with SpaceX having a very high launch tempo with the Falcon rockets already, Blue Origin being forced to maybe settle things down and figure out what went wrong before they try another launch, it could give SpaceX an advantage.
OK, Bloomberg's Global Defence editor, Jerry Doyle, thank you very much. Well, coming up on the programme, we'll bring you some of our interview with Alberto Masalim, the St. Louis Fed president, of course. That's next. This is Bloomberg.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute global news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Joanna Bersetchi in El Ola, Saudi Arabia, and this is Bloomberg.
Trading day is about to start.
And you're already looking for that edge.
The opening trade brings you everything you need to know as markets open across Europe.
I'm Guy Johnson.
I'm Anna Edwards.
And I'm Tom McKenzie.
This is your opening trade.
Only on Bloomberg.
Know how the market day started.
Find out how it finishes.
Public markets to private markets.
From the micro to the macro.
Covering retail, entertainment, the business of sports.
The supply chains, trade policy, how it all is impacting the U.S. equity market as we drive to the closing bell at 4 p.m.
A holistic approach to covering financial markets.
If it matters to your life, we're covering it. I'm Katie Greifeld.
And I'm Romaine Bostic, and this is The Close.
Live every weekday.
Only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
From the world of politics to the world of business, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live 2 times a day, every trading day. Balance of Power at 1 and 5 Eastern, only on Bloomberg.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, 6:19 a.m. here in London. Staying with tech, Dell shares soaring almost 40% in late trade after its full-year sales outlook far surpassed analyst estimates, fueled by demand for servers that power the AI work. Now, the hardware maker sees fiscal year revenue reaching about $167 billion, including $60 billion from AI servers. Let's get some analysis now. We can break down the numbers with Bloomberg senior strategist Neil Campling. Neil, what should we make of these results then? Put them in context for us.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously the stock has had a huge run already, 150% into the this year, into the close before the massive price reaction after hours. I think what really stood out, Lizzie, was the fact that they raised guidance by like 35% on the top line versus consensus, and that's for the fiscal year. And why that stands out so much is this was only the fiscal first quarter. So the fact that they are delivering across the board numbers that were simply way above street expectations, as we can see on the screen, that EBITDA was 45% above street estimates, revenues above the consensus by over 20%, and then to raise the guidance substantially above consensus, even greater than that, suggesting acceleration of growth. The demand for AI servers, it literally finds no way of denting the appetite there. It's just really, I think, that we're so early in the fiscal year that they guide so far above the street tells you there is a huge demand for this, just like we had from their rival Lenovo out of Hong Kong earlier this month.
And meanwhile, you've got Apollo and Blackstone said to be working on a debt financing deal to help Anthropic build out its AI infrastructure. How significant is it in terms of private credit and also chip financing coming together?
Yeah, I think what we've already seen, obviously, in the public equity markets, a huge surge in a lot of the related AI baskets and thematics and stocks, but it's seeped obviously into the private credit space, into other assets where really everyone kind of wants a piece of the AI exposure and opportunity. And clearly, this particular deal again is showing us that there is high financing needs to build out these ecosystems, and massive bets are being made on who potentially could be the winners in this particular AI race. But in terms of like when we're looking at paybacks and opportunities, when we're looking at things like data center buildouts, these are multi-year, multi-decade opportunities. Hence the attraction for the debt offerings and the appetite to get involved, I think.
And this is a new funding round seen Anthropic eclipsing OpenAI's value for the first time. I feel like your job on Daybreak Europe, Neil, has become putting things into context for us, telling us who's the bigger fish and by how much. Do you want to just do that again in the case of these two companies?
Yeah, sure, Lizzie. I think the background here is that the founders of Anthropic have come out of OpenAI. And we heard earlier through Bloomberg exclusives earlier this month that Anthropic's revenue run rate in Q2 was far greater than OpenAI's revenue run rate in Q1 that we had the data for. So it's a sense that Anthropic's potential market cap now in terms of the funding rounds is greater than OpenAI. So sort of being born out of OpenAI in one sense kind of tells you just how big Anthropic has become. And Anthropic with Claude is really, I thought, the business case opportunities for AI, whereas perhaps so far what we've seen is a lot of the OpenAI ecosystem is more for consumers, for us to use on an everyday basis, whereas where people or investors are concerned about the impact of AI in the workplace, it's really by using Claude and the agentic AI toolsets, of which Anthropic does appear to be the best in class today, in terms of offering solutions rather than using sort of software as a service or the other stacks that are out there. So this kind of validates, I think, the positioning of Anthropic as today the leader in the AI ecosystems. But as we know in technology, things can change very fast. So the race is not run. There's not a definitive answer as to who wins out. But for now, sort of Anthropic is certainly leading the charge. And the growth rates have been absolutely stunning in terms of the last year or so for the business. And remember, Anthropic had no product less than 3 years ago. So simply is stunning.
Yeah, striking, really striking. Neil, thank you very much for the analysis, the context this morning. As ever, Bloomberg senior strategist Neil Campling out of Brighton. So I hope you enjoy the beach this weekend, Neil. Well, turning to the macro now, the St. Louis Fed president says that policymakers need to be open to the possibility of a rate hike, given the current economic backdrop. Alberto Masalem told us that he agrees with Fed officials who wanted to drop the easing bias from the April statement.
Their real policy rate right now is running at around 0.5%, which is lower than the 1% that the committee believes is the neutral rate. I think you have to look at the full picture, and it looks to me like policy is at or slightly below the committee's long-run neutral level.
But if you combine that with the other things you talk about, you had emphasized the risks of the inflationary pressures on the demand side and the supply side of the economy. It sounds like you think they should be leaning towards tightening. It sounds like you might have been one of the policymakers in the April meeting who actually thought they should have removed the statement against tightening in the statement.
So yes, I supported the interest rate decision, but I thought the easing bias was no longer consistent with the outlook and the balance of risks, which in my mind, the balance of risk has shifted a little bit towards the inflation side and less towards the employment side. So whether the economy will require a hike or a cut or a hold will depend on the scenario. There is a scenario where inflation remains high. There's no disinflation in the next quarter or two. And in that scenario, the economy will probably require a hike. There's also a scenario where the economy weakens materially in the second half of the year because real incomes are challenged and corporate margins are challenged. In that scenario, inflation could come down. In that scenario, we would be thinking of no hikes, maybe even a cut. So there are two scenarios to play with here.
But looking down the track, at least the markets are now fully pricing a rate hike by March 2027. Given where we are now, how we think things are going to proceed with oil prices and some of the risks on the supply side that you talk about, do you think that's a sensible thing for them to price?
Again, I think there are two scenarios here, and I don't comment normally on market pricing. I'm more focused on what's best for the economy and for Main Street. Markets have repriced materially in the U.S. and in other countries in the front end of the curve. I think that's markets trying to understand what our reaction function is.
The St. Louis Fed President Alberto Masalem speaking to Bloomberg's Stephanie Flanders there at the Reykjavik Economic Conference. Well, let's check in on these markets. 6:27 a.m. here in London, and we are looking at stocks globally at all-time highs on the hopes of a truce renewal between the US and Iran. Asian stocks have been higher, and that is boosted by oil. You can see it here. Brent lower at $92.67 a barrel, down 1.1% now on the optimism that flows through the Strait of Hormuz can resume. And in fact, Brent on track for its worst month since 2020. We're down 18% since May. Treasuries up across the curve. The 10-year there at 4.43, and the dollar trading in a narrow range. Coming up, though, we shall turn to economics and we'll discuss the euro area and the UK with Ankita Amajari from Pantheon Macroeconomics. That conversation coming up next. Good morning from London. This is Bloomberg.
U.S. jobs numbers are released, Bloomberg has the report under surveillance with crucial data and expert analysis at terminal speed. Nobody covers Jobs Day like Bloomberg.
Key investors, top executives, global innovators. Join me for in-depth conversations with the biggest newsmakers on the day's top stories.
Insight with Haslinda Ahmed, only on Bloomberg.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Burden in London, and these are the stories that set your agenda.
Taking you from the U.S. market's close to the overnight session in Asia, we'll walk you through what you need to know to kickstart Europe's trading day. Live from our European headquarters, we bring you the day's top market-moving stories, unmatched expert analysis, and on-the-ground reporting from across the continent. Tune in to Daybreak Europe, only on Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute political news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Tyler Kendall in Washington, and this is Bloomberg.
Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Burden with your top stories. The US and Iran reach a tentative deal to extend their ceasefire for 60 days, subject to approval from President Trump. Meanwhile, a tech rally in Asia and the Iran optimism have powered global stocks to a new record high. Brent crude set for its weakest month in 6 years. And Bloomberg learns that SpaceX has trimmed $200 billion from its valuation target as it prepares to launch next month's blockbuster IPO. Well, a very good morning. Welcome to the show. If you're just joining us, 6:30 a.m. here in London, and this is the picture in markets this happy Friday. We've got Asian stocks up, European futures higher, and coming off record highs on Wall Street, futures flat to the upside there as well. All on this optimism that we are close to a US-Iran deal to extend their ceasefire by 60 days, pending President Trump's sign-off, and you've also got tech boosting stocks in Asia as well. Now, flip the board cross-asset, and you can see what's boosting sentiment. Really, it's the fact that oil is lower, more than 1% for Brent now at $92.66 a barrel. Yields are lower across the Treasury curve. We're down a basis point at 444 on the 10-year, and gold has been holding on to its gains. We're around $4,500 an ounce as the hopes for a deal ease inflation fears. Let's see if we can get it over the line. Time now, though, for our front page news. We'll start off with the Financial Times, shall we, this morning. They, of course, as you'd expect, are leading on the hopes of that US-Iran peace deal. An administration official saying that the two sides have reached this memorandum of understanding, but President Trump yet to approve the document. We also have the Wall Street Journal this morning, but they're focusing on its own reporting that real estate agents are quitting the slow US housing market, saying that experienced professionals have reached their breaking point. And if we come to Europe now, we can look at Italy's Corriere della Sera. They're leading with Blue Origin and a headline describing the explosion of one of its rockets during the launch pad tests, as we were watching earlier. Really dramatic scenes. You can get a roundup of all the stories you need to know to get your day going in today's edition of the Daybreak newsletter, which, as always, terminal subscribers can find by going to DAYB Go. Well, let's turn to the data that we're due today. Fresh inflation data from Germany, France, Spain and Italy expected to provide further evidence of the mounting price pressures across the euro area, driven largely by that surge in energy costs following the war in Iran. Now, the figures come just days before the ECB's next policy meeting, widely expected to hike rates, and we've also just had the minutes of the last one. So let's break it all down. We can talk to Jana Randau out of Frankfurt. Jana, good morning to you. Just talk us through what we should expect from the inflation data and where it would leave the ECB.
Good morning, Lizzie. Yes, so a big day for the ECB, for the Eurozone, for everybody who is watching over inflation trends. And as you mentioned, we will get data from all of the region's 4 largest economies this morning. It doesn't happen too often that all of them come out on the same day, but the message will be one that that filters across the region. We expect pickups in all of those except for Germany. There's a small slowdown in the cards there, but even then, that rate is still expected to be at 2.8%. So quite a bit above what the ECB considers optimal, the 2% target. Now, what will be interesting is to see whether whether that is only confined to energy, or whether the core rate, those that the one that strips out volatile items, energy for sure, food as well, whether that picks up, because that will go a long way to assessing underlying price pressures across the region, and that will be important to the ECB. I do want to mention that we will get also a little bit of a signal from some countries over the health of the economy itself. So consumer spending in France, for example, is expected to have declined in April. Italian unemployment probably went up. So a big day for everybody who's interested in what the Eurozone economy has been up to lately.
Who is not interested in that, Jana? But interesting as we look ahead to June, looking back to April, that a number of officials wouldn't have opposed a hike even then.
Yeah, I mean, we knew that a hike was on the table. The president mentioned it when she briefed reporters after the April decision. But what we learned yesterday, that it might have been a little closer than we thought. That people said, and a number of them actually said it was a close call, and people would not have objected a hike. They weren't quite ready to propose it themselves. That is the job of the chief economist, Philip Lane, but they wouldn't have objected had he done so. And that tells you a little bit about the uncertainty, about what's happening, how difficult it is to make a decision. And of course, the June one is coming up, and we're hearing from all corners that a hike then is pretty much inevitable. The hawks are saying, saying it outright. Philip Lane, the chief economist, has signaled it without using exactly the same words. And even some of the doves that I had a chance to speak to over the last couple of days, they said, look, a hike comes at a cost to the economy. I wish we didn't have to do it. But we're still probably going to have to face it, if only to preserve the credibility of the ECB, because their inflation in the Eurozone running at 3% already, expected to pick up. Data next week will show that. So yeah, really not much of a choice for the policymakers, and we'll see the first building block, if you want, for their arguments that they will make in 2 weeks' time this morning.
Jana, thank you very much. That's Bloomberg's Jana Randau across all the thinking behind the scenes of the Governing Council. Well, for more analysis, let's now bring in Ankita Amajuri, Europe economist over at Pantheon Macroeconomics. Really good to have you with me on set this morning. So we've got this new development, potentially a truce between the US and Iran, an extension of the 60-day ceasefire. Is it already too late to stop the ECB hiking in June and maybe follow-up hikes later in the year?
So we remain of the view that the ECB will still hike in June, mainly because even this peace deal, if it goes through, it does not change the outlook for inflation materially. Oil prices are significantly higher than where they were at the start of the year. And perhaps rather than 3%, we might have a 0.1 percentage point lower forecast based on the latest changes. But ultimately, for now, we are expecting 2 rate hikes, the first one in June. We also think it'll be followed up by a second one in July. However, once inflation has been brought down a bit, we expect the bank to cut rates soon after, early next year.
But is the ECB not at risk of tightening into a growth slowdown that hasn't fully revealed itself yet?
There is that risk, like your colleague Jana just mentioned. There is a risk to growth, which for now we are not seeing a significant slowdown in growth just yet. However, we're coming, this inflation shock now comes at a time just shortly after the previous one. And perhaps inflation is the more pressing issue for the central bank right now. Firms already have this inertia of raising prices in the post-pandemic inflation surge. So we think the bank will ultimately choose to respond by hiking rates, sacrificing growth to a certain extent, but wanting to maintain its credibility on the inflation front.
Well, in terms of that inflation issue then, how much is Germany's fuel tax cut masking a broader inflation problem at this point?
So part of the reason we're expecting a slight decrease this month is because of the cuts to energy taxes. But overall, we still think that even in Germany, there will be second-round effects over the next few months, resulting from the surge in oil prices.
Okay. Let's also talk about the Bank of England. Is the market expecting too many hikes this year from the BOE? 2 is what's priced.
In my view, 2 is too many. We are expecting 1, which is in July. And even then, it is a close call because the labour market in the UK is weakening and the risks to growth in the UK are a bit higher. We saw as well that the April inflation data was a little bit weaker than expected. Part of that was because of cuts to energy prices that were part of the autumn budget. And there were also, let's say, one-off effects on airline ticket prices, etc. Those will unwind over the coming months. We do expect inflation to rise a bit further. But given the significantly weaker labour market here in the UK, we think perhaps markets are pricing in too many rate hikes.
But does it not damage the BOE's credibility to only go for 1, if that's what happens, according to your forecast, when they sounded so hawkish a few months ago?
Well, on that front, the BOE, the Bank of England, has not hit its inflation target for a long time now. Whether that does significant damage to its credibility is it is an interesting question. But here in the UK, I would say it's again a story of the weaker labour market, and perhaps that will take more precedence over inflation.
Just finally, we've got to talk about the politics. I wonder if you buy Andy Burnham's pledge, this is of course the Greater Manchester Mayor, to stick to Chancellor Rachel Reeves's fiscal rules if he were to become the next Prime Minister, replacing Keir Starmer. Because we've seen yields falling, but should the bond market really be encouraged by this?
At the moment, we think that perhaps 20 basis points in gilt yields is a risk premium related to the ongoing political uncertainty. A lot of the policy stances from Mayor Andy Burnham, or former Mayor Andy Burnham, will require more spending. Whether that comes in the form of higher taxes or more borrowing remains to be seen. But overall, we think it will add a couple of basis points more to gilt yields. And ultimately, it is, we do think he is likely to stick to the fiscal rules and perhaps might not even have another option if bond markets don't allow for greater flexibility around that.
Yeah. But they'll keep him in a straitjacket where he might need to pull some uncomfortable levers, whether that's borrowing or higher taxes. Ankita, really great to have you with us in the studio for the first time on Daybreak Europe. Ankita Amajuri, thank you, Europe economist over at Pantheon Macroeconomics. Well, coming up on the programme, why SpaceX is said to be cutting $200 billion from its valuation target as Elon Musk's company nears its debut. More on our scoop next. This is Bloomberg.
We are dealing with supply issues, and so therefore fertilizer, the planting season, food security is high up there, but so too is fuel. and energy. So yet again, as we had with Ukraine, the energy crisis, the food crisis, the cost of living, and that kind of fiscal space needs to be created for countries that are going to be dealing with the debt crisis. They are still repaying their debts. Inflation will result in interest rates that will put many countries in jeopardy on the debt issue. So we're looking to find solutions here from the IMF, from the World Bank. There have been many offers of the windows and facilities that could be put at the disposal of countries. But I think at this stage we need scale. Many countries are still recovering from the previous shocks, and some of those crises are not over yet.
Middle East and Africa. Vibrant resources and high-yield investment opportunities abound. Join me on Horizon's Middle East and Africa for the stories, newsmakers, and insight from this exciting region. Now weekdays, only on Bloomberg.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute geopolitical news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in the Lesotho Highlands, and this is Bloomberg.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Just coming up to 6:45 a.m. here in London, and Bloomberg has learned that SpaceX is lowering its targeted IPO valuation to at least $1.8 trillion. Elon Musk's company is seeking to raise as much as $75 billion, which would make it the biggest IPO of all time. Let's now get more on this scoop with Matt Bloxham from Bloomberg Intelligence. So, Matt, sources had told us earlier that it was aiming for a valuation above $2 trillion. Why are they given a discount now? Is this always been built in, do you think?
Probably, and I think, pricing an IPO is always a bit of a dark art, and it could well get back up above $2 trillion, through the process. Let's wait and see. And obviously, what the bankers are trying to balance here is giving a big enough valuation so the company gets good value in terms of how much money it raises, but also leaving enough on the table so that investors that take part actually see a kind of flotation day pop, and so they feel like it's been a success. And so balancing those two things can be quite tricky. But obviously, the roadshow hasn't started. They've got some initial feedback from investors, but they'll get a lot more through that process, which could start next week, and that will narrow the pricing range down. But these are big valuation multiples. I mean, a $2 trillion valuation would imply about 100 times trailing sales. That's massive. Now, Rocket Lab, one of their direct space rocket peers, trades on a similar multiple, but then if you look at something like Anthropic, that seems like it's trading on about 20 times forward sales. So there are lots of different valuation multiples and benchmarks here, and it's going to be quite interesting to see where investors put the weighting. Yeah,
it feels like we're entering a new era when it comes to all these IPOs. We've been talking a lot about the rocket side of things, but what could Musk's XAI business mean for the IPO?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you kind of have to look at this. It's an incredibly complex business now, and XAI, is growing at an incredibly rapid rate. Could go from a $1 billion kind of annual revenue run rate to about 20 billion or more in a couple of years, based on our own calculations. A lot of that is coming from this Anthropic deal they signed. Anthropic using them for AI compute capacity, and also the potential acquisition of Cursor, which is the kind of leading agentic AI business. But kind of rapid growth there, and so suddenly the AI elements of the business could quickly dwarf things like the rocket business and the Starlink broadband business in terms of sales.
Okay, really interesting. But we also know that SpaceX could be facing a US government review over its defense contracts. Could that impact the IPO?
I think it's unlikely to. I think, certainly there could be a deep investigation here of, the kind of national security interest given their exposure, particularly to NASA. I think the reality is that there'll probably be mitigating factors that SpaceX agrees to kind of give assurances about the kind of the secrecy issue and the influence of foreign investors in the business. I mean, a couple of things here. A, SpaceX has been working with the US agencies for a long time, so there's, I think, a strong degree of trust between the two sides there. The second is actually it's Elon Musk that they need to be comfortable with, because he's going to own 80 or 85% of the voting rights in this business. So it's almost a kind of derivative, who is influencing Elon Musk, because he's the one that ultimately is calling the shots at SpaceX and will continue to for the future. And so he's the person that they really need to be confident that they can trust.
And of course, we know his relationship with Donald Trump over the years has been rocky, to say the least. Matt, thank you very much. That's Matt Bloxham from Bloomberg Intelligence. Well, it's a Bloomberg Intelligence double-header today because we're also have BI reporting that the UK could miss its goal of adding 1.5 million new homes in the current parliamentary term by at least 40%. Their study says that the government needs to ramp up efforts to stimulate demand and help developers. And Ivona Hovenko from Bloomberg Intelligence is with us now for more on this. So thank you also for joining us, Ivona. Your analysis then suggests that annual housing construction in 2026 to 2029 would need to rise 40 to 50% above current projections to meet the government's 1.5 million homes target. I mean, it was always seen as massively ambitious, this target. So what explains such a large gap then?
Well, the market was never geared for that kind of level of construction. And just to put it in context, that level of housing construction has not been reached since the 70s. Yeah. And this was actually driven by the big social and public housing construction program, as well as actually a big involvement of SME home builders. What's happening right now is that government has been trying to stimulate supply. However, for years now, new housing has been actually lagging the pre-COVID levels, and it's not going to recover anytime soon, especially as the backdrop weakens, confidence is weak, rates are high, we have another cost of living crisis. So the backdrop is extremely unsupportive, and on top of that, we have another spike in construction costs coming. So just simply, the maths don't work.
And of course, all of this is the sort of thing that the contenders to potentially replace Keir Starmer will be thinking about, not just from Labour, but from other parties as well. When it comes to policy, though, you argue that buyer support may be needed, something maybe like Help to Buy. Wouldn't that just risk pushing house prices higher, which has been such a problem over the years?
Yes, there is the risk of that. However, the previous Help to Buy ended just as the rates were spiking. So I'm arguing that there is no single silver bullet. We need a different variety of measures, also supply side. And a new Help to Buy also needs to be really well targeted at the marginal buyers. The previous Help to Buy was faced a lot of criticism for supporting buyers who never actually needed it.
But you have the bank of mum and dad.
Well, yes, but not everybody has that, and also even those mums and dads are squeezed. They have to think about their own retirements, etc. So we need supply side support as well. But home builders, won't start new projects if if they're not selling right now. They usually match those sales rates to new starts to sales rates. So this really is a function of.
So if I give you a menu of some of the potential policy levers that a new PM could pull, what would make the biggest difference? Stamp duty reform, public housing investment, cutting regulation, as you say, helping smaller developers. What would make the biggest difference?
And again, I would here say there is no silver bullet, and several of those measures require time, money, or both. And there is no money, as we are well aware. So I think, stamp duty has been a very toxic tax, but it's the residential side of it generates £10 billion a year. So the government cannot afford to scrap it, but maybe some reform could be supportive. I would say the easiest levers right now are in the regulation space, because they could potentially deliver the fastest and they might not cost the government very much. A long time ago, one of the home builders said, in terms of the affordable housing requirements, for example, and if you raise those targets too high and the projects are not viable, you will just get 100% of nothing.
But you do wonder why this hasn't happened yet from Labour, when they said they'd be the builders, not the blockers. But really good to get this research from you. Thank you so much for flagging it to us.
Thank you very much.
Ivona Hovenko from Bloomberg Intelligence. Well, we've still got plenty more coming up, so don't go anywhere. This is Bloomberg.
Get your fixed income fix. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield around the world right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Good morning. Good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to the opening trade.
Watch Bloomberg Tech.
This is the Asia Trade.
This is Wall Street Week.
Welcome to Balance of Power.
You're watching Bloomberg Deals.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend.
This is Bloomberg Television.
At 9:30 a.m., the market tells you what it's really thinking.
We beat the drum to the opening bell.
With deep analysis of the forces driving the price action.
Focusing investors on what really matters.
Where the money flows, which markets are changing.
Conversations with players shaping the narrative.
Innovative growth companies gravitate to NASDAQ.
It's not just like, let's buy the Mag 7 or AI.
That's a really compelling story.
This is where your trading day begins.
And this is Open Interest.
Only on Bloomberg.
When news breaks,
a redhead across the Bloomberg terminal.
Bloomberg has you covered.
Trump's global tariffs are struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court.
For all the context and clarity you need.
There's going to be now tons of tariff headlines until midterm elections.
Hear it first on Bloomberg.
Our mandate is price stability and maximum employment, and right now we're above target on inflation, and so the possibility or probability that we might consider an interest rate increase in the future, I think, has to be greater than zero.
A little more from the St. Louis Fed President Alberto Mosalem. They're decidedly hawkish in his tone. But let's look at the data, shall we? We've, of course, got US PCE data yesterday, the preferred inflation gauge for the Federal Reserve. And what we saw was the continued squeeze on the US consumer, given all of the inflation pressures from the Iran war. So struggling to pare back purchases of household goods, to pay for gas bills. And there you've seen personal savings dropping and personal income back to zero. Income in the blue line, savings here in the white. Now flip the board, because we may be in for some good news. It looks like we're on the precipice of a deal to extend the ceasefire between the US and Iran for another 60 days. Trump still needs to sign off on this, but of course it would be a relief for consumers. And so in anticipation, in terms of the stock picture, we've seen this rotation into consumer discretionary stocks, in fact, surpassing tech stocks here in the blue line, and maybe we will see that continue. One to watch, though we have heard from the Vice President J.D. Vance saying that this deal is still TBD. So we shall be across all of the developments right here for you on Bloomberg TV. You can get these charts at CHRT TV Go. But Jemana Basecci and Tom McKenzie will be taking you all the way to the European Cash Open next. And we'll have an exclusive with Andrew Bailey, the BOE governor, later today. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.
Everybody has a moment where they put into action all they've practiced, where they step up to a challenge and either succeed or fail. But what are those moments for some of the world's most influential leaders?
It was a rough and tumble world, and I thought, okay, I can rise up, I can play this game, and I did play the game.
It was great, and it was depressing, and it was disappointing.
My chair at the time sat down with me and said, "Succession starts now."
I'm Francine Lacqua, an award-winning journalist. For the last 25 years, I've interviewed world leaders, bank bosses, even fashion icons. I'm often asking about the news of the moment. But I've always been curious, who are these people as leaders? Join me for the podcast version of Leaders with Francine Lacqua. I'll start your week with conversations that explore what drives the world's most influential people, how today's leaders got to where they are, where they're going next, and how they've transformed their organization in the process.
Make decisions. A poor decision is always better than no decision.
You have to have truth tellers around you, and you have to be willing to listen.
You don't want to be setting strategy in the middle of a transaction, that's for sure.
Do it for the right reasons. Don't do it because of FOMO.
We'll also learn lessons which we can apply to our work and daily lives. Tune into the podcast version of Leaders with Francine Lacqua. Listen and watch on Bloomberg Television or wherever you get your podcasts.
At a time when policy in Washington is driving Wall Street, we draw a distinction between the rhetoric and the action, bringing you market-moving guests and original reporting. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute space news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Ed Ludlow at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and this is Bloomberg.
Good morning. It is Friday, May the 29th. Here's what's on the agenda. Oil set for its biggest monthly drop since 2020 as the US and Iran edge closer to a deal, while Dell earnings give stocks another boost. SpaceX's valuation goes from intergalactic to interstellar as Anthropic closes in on $1 trillion.
And let's check in on the market reaction to both the tech developments and, of course, geopolitical developments at Bloomberg and other news outlets reporting that Iran and the U.S. have agreed on the terms of a memorandum of understanding. However, awaiting final sign-off, we have not heard from President Trump, neither Iranian officials. So that gave a bit of boost to markets yesterday. This morning, maybe a bit of headline fatigue coming through. S&P futures only up about 7 basis points, but another record close yesterday, keeping a close eye on Dell. As Tom was just saying, that stock up 40% in extended trading. European markets up 0.2% again, so maybe once again we're a bit immune to some of the geopolitical headlines coming through. Brent, however, we have scaled down. We are now down to $93 a barrel, down about 0.8% as we continue to price in what could be an effective reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Now the countdown to the opening trade starts right now.
Good morning. Happy Friday. So a 60-day truce has been agreed between the US and Iran, as we've been discussing, and we need the president's sign-off on that. He says he wants a few days. Crucially, within that deal, we are hearing from our reporting that the Strait of Hormuz and the reopening of that strait with no tolls will be included in that deal. Again, if the president signs off, oil then on the downside once again. As an investor, how do you trade this? How much is priced in around this deal already?
Yeah.
Do you now go full in on those names that have been devalued as a result of the geopolitical risks? Is this now the all clear in terms of the geopolitics and Iran?
And I think that's a valid question to ask, because with each time we've been here, and certainly we've been here before, there have been multiple reports of the two sides edging closer and closer and closer to a deal. The reaction in the market becomes less pronounced. And once again this morning we're walking in, European futures, S&P futures not doing that much. I would say, though, that this time does feel a little bit different because you have so many Gulf Arab states also participating in the mediation attempts. And it seems as though, from the language of the likes of the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent overnight, J.D. Vance as well, that this time we really are very, very close. But to your point, we are seeing the reaction in Brent, but not just in spot Brent, but also if you go all the way out to December as well, we are seeing contracts further down the line also sell off too, which tells you that for a long time we've been talking about this market being in backwardation. December trading close to 80, possibly even
sub 80 does suggest that the market, the energy markets, are pricing in a somewhat fast normalization.
And here are the caveats that you know all too well, which is even if we get a deal, we have to demine the strait. That could take weeks, possibly months. Then you have to rebuild and fix the infrastructure in the region as well. And then, of course, it takes weeks to actually get the vessels to those destinations. And so this is a time frame that we have to weigh up. As you hear from the likes of Chevron's CEO speaking to the FT, saying actually oil prices could tick up in the summer because of the tightness in terms of physical supply. TD Securities coming out and saying we could end up losing another 1 billion barrels of supply during a recovery period. This, when we're looking at prices of Brent, the lowest in a month.
Yeah,
since
my
2020.
question is that already in the price?
Yes.
Is that already factored into people's expectations? So got to see how this one plays out. But for now, the people who have been more cautious on energy prices seem to be in the lead. But it's not just about energy, Tom. No. So many tech stories to talk about. I want to start with Dell. 40% up in extended trading. And what emerged from their earnings report yesterday and also their guidance for the year is, once again, AI seems to be pushing them forwards. And they've had a stupendous amount of growth in their AI servers business.
At 40%, this is not a penny stock. I mean, a 40% move is enormous for a company like Dell. We were crunching the numbers, the team was crunching the numbers. Dell is currently on track to be the best performing stock in the S&P 500 this month.
Wow.
Currently on track for that. And to your point, it's the AI server business for Dell. They have a backlog of $51 billion when it comes to that unit. Profit was almost $5. The estimates have been for close to $3. In terms of the revenue outlook, that's been raised from $140 billion to $170 billion. The first quarter sales jumping almost 90%, 88%, well above the estimates. And so again, it's just a reminder that you are getting stocks that are far outstripping in terms of the gains, the hyperscalers, those that are playing into the data center story, because they sell to the likes of CoreWeave, they sell to the likes of Nscale.
Yeah, and it's not just about the hyperscalers in this space. To your point, there are other opportunities, and clearly Dell is one of the ones that are standing out here. And they're saying even with the language around the earnings, the AI opportunity shows no signs of slowing. I'm curious to see the knock-on effects on some of the European companies that
absolutely.
May also benefit.
Infineon supplies into Dell, and Air Liquide over in France supplies into Dell as well. So just two names in the European space that could move on the back of this. You talked about just the number of headlines crossing on the tech front this
IPO
morning.
mania.
IPO mania. And look, SpaceX is up front and centre. And the reporting from the team stateside suggesting the valuation, which had been pegged at around $2 trillion in April, is now at around $1.8 billion. They're looking to raise $75 billion. Do you read into this that there is actually
1.8 trillion
at some point the appetite for these IPOs is obviously going to be constrained, because you've got SpaceX, you've got Anthropic, and you've got OpenAI, all potentially this year.
It's a three-horse race.
It's a three-horse race.
It is a three-horse race, but also the appetite seems to be phenomenal. I mean, SpaceX will be the largest ever IPO that comes to market. That's going to happen in a couple of weeks' time. I was reading a report in the FT this morning saying that investors are getting beside themselves, getting access to funds that already have a little bit of exposure to SpaceX. There's something about Elon Musk companies that the retail investor wants to get access to, and you've already started to see signs of that. Anthropic, also interesting, another funding round overnight, which has put them at a $965 billion valuation, just shy of $1 trillion. That's slightly more, I guess, than OpenAI. But essentially what you're talking about is one company that's going to IPO with an almost $2 trillion valuation, and two companies that are going to come to the market with an almost $1 trillion valuation.
Just absolutely remarkable. A company that is looking potentially at revenues of around $40 billion US dollars within the year. And of course, they've led on that enterprise piece. And now in terms of the valuation, topping OpenAI, at least for now.
One superlative that I think you're going to enjoy, Tom, and this is to do with Anthropic. The valuation growth is the fastest in venture capital history, according to PitchBook. It reached its latest valuation roughly 3 years and 2 months after launching its first product. So it went from, let's say, sub 100 billion to 1 trillion in the space of 3 years and a bit.
I love that superlative, and it's perfect for this Friday. Let's get you up to speed on what else is coming up through the show today. Richard Clode, talking of tech. Janus Henderson, Global Technology Team Portfolio Manager, someone with really deep insights in this tech space and someone who can answer some of these questions for us. In terms of the broader US equity story, Venu Krishna, Barclays head of US equity strategy, with those views in terms of how to position right now. Catherine Nace, PGIM's deputy head of global economics and chief European economist, will be joining us as well as we work through some CPI and inflation data out of the Eurozone.
Yeah, let's not forget the macro. Let's look ahead to what else we are watching out for throughout the day. We're going to get fresh inflation data from a number of European countries, including Germany, France, Spain and Italy. So watch out for those. At 10:20 a.m. UK, the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey will deliver a keynote speech at the Reykjavik Economic Conference. So we're watching out for any headlines there on how he sees the UK economy. And 12 p.m. UK, the Shangri-La Dialogue begins in Singapore. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth will attend Saturday. Later on this afternoon, the Reagan National Economic Forum. Scott Bessent, Mary Daly will be speaking. And then, of course, it is the last day of the month, SCOTUS Opinion Day. And there, we're actually keeping an eye out for the ruling around the Fed's Lisa Cook. Remember that story from a couple of months ago. So we'll see if the SCOTUS have anything to say about that. But inflation in Europe, top of mind today. A couple of things I would say is the expectation is we are going to see higher numbers for broadly all of these European countries, I think with the exception of Germany. The ECB minutes yesterday came through quite hawkish. It seems as though we're pretty much set on a June rate hike. The question is it one and done? Or are we going to see a series of hikes out of the ECB?
To your point, markets pricing in more than 80% chance that the ECB hikes in June. Markets pricing in and locking in a full 2 25 basis point hikes by the end of this year. What do the inflation dynamics of today do to that estimation? So we're going to get Spanish CPI and we're going to get French CPI over the next 2 hours, and then the broader picture for the Eurozone as well. At a time when we're thinking about Tokyo and Japan, interestingly, that Tokyo's inflation, which is a key barometer for Japanese inflation, actually coming in lower than the estimates. So the slowest pace in 4 years. Because
there's been a bit of government support there.
There has been government support. That has been a factor, absolutely. Does it change the dynamics for the BOJ? The estimates and the analysis from our team suggests possibly not. But it's interesting, the inflation has ticked lower in Tokyo with those caveats as we look ahead to the pictures in terms of inflation story out of the Eurozone through the next few hours. Here's what else to think about this morning then. China's export prices, talking inflation, have risen at the sharpest pace in 3 years as the Iran war sends energy costs soaring. An official measure of China's overall export prices increased 5% in the year to April. Several factors beyond the Iran war also drove prices higher. The global AI build-out has caused a shortage of chips, of course, leading to a surge in the price of exports of Chinese electronics and electric machinery. Friedrich Merz has brushed aside talk that his plummeting popularity could prompt a bid to replace him as Germany's chancellor. There's no indication that a plan to replace Merz has taken shape, but the prospect of such a move is a matter of open debate. Merz has responded by vowing to press ahead with a reform agenda. Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket exploded in a massive fireball while undergoing a test on a Florida launch pad yesterday evening. The company said the rocket experienced a, quote, anomaly during the test, adding that all personnel have been accounted for and are safe. Blue Origin was preparing the vehicle for its 4th launch, which was slated to deploy a batch of satellites for Amazon's LEO, a rival satellite network to SpaceX's Starlink. It is a major setback to the firm, backed, of course, by Jeff Bezos, and its effort to challenge a dominant SpaceX.
And coming up, global central bankers are increasingly warning of inflation risks tied to the energy price shock. We'll bring you some of our interview with Alberto Musalem, president of the St. Louis Fed. Plus, with the SpaceX mega IPO on the horizon, we take a deep look into the Elon Musk-owned company. We will bring you that analysis from Bloomberg Intelligence later in the show. But up next, we'll be joined by Ludovic Subran, Allianz CIO and Chief Economist. And if you have any questions of your own for our guests, please send them to us on IB Plus at BBTV Go. This is Bloomberg.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm David Gura.
I'm Lisa Mateo.
And I'm Christina Ruffini. We're tracking breaking news today from Wall Street to Washington.
Let's start overseas. The sector is really propelling this deal forward.
Yeah, the hope is this will open up new markets and provide some additional liquidity.
Of course, now they're going to have competitors. We got a big week coming up in politics.
Earnings season is underway. We're going to get some key reports.
Everything you need to know before the markets open on Monday.
Introducing Bloomberg This Weekend, bringing a little Bloomberg into your weekend routine.
Guys, buckle up.
It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. ETF IQ, only on Bloomberg.
Astonishing day for US technology.
Shaping the region's technology ecosystem.
Asia's biggest tech news and innovation.
Welcome to the world of decentralized finance.
Why is it that NFTs have not recovered in the same way that, say, Bitcoin has?
Bloomberg is covering all things crypto.
It's a pretty spectacular story.
The people.
This is the future. This is the 21st century economy.
The transactions.
It snapped up nearly $1 billion of Bitcoin.
And the technology.
We need to build a digital Fort Knox.
That gives people financial freedom, and that's a wonderful thing.
That's extraordinary.
We ride the wave that is Bitcoin.
Bloomberg Crypto, only on Bloomberg.
Trading day is about to start.
And you're already looking for that edge.
The opening trade brings you everything you need to know as markets open across Europe.
I'm Guy Johnson.
I'm Anna Edwards.
And I'm Tom McKenzie.
This is your opening trade.
Only on Bloomberg.
Middle East tensions are high.
Both sides willing to go back to the battlefield.
The narrative changes moment to moment.
Is there a ceasefire? Is there not a ceasefire? Markets are up, markets are down.
Count on Bloomberg for up-to-the-minute reporting.
Breaking news this morning.
Breaking news in the last few minutes.
On-the-ground perspective.
Talking to you from the bomb shelter.
This White House still pushing.
And the analysis you need to make informed decisions fast.
Clearly, nothing is final until it's well and truly final.
The really important question is whether we'll get second-round effects.
Nobody covers geopolitics like Bloomberg.
It is a multifaceted agreement, and nothing is going to be on the table until we see the Strait of Hormuz open and the Iranians agree that they have to turn over the highly enriched uranium and that they can't have a nuclear program.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent speaking during a White House briefing. Now, all declines as the U.S. and Iran reach a tentative deal to extend a ceasefire by 60 days and begin further nuclear talks with Tehran. Bloomberg understands that President Trump is yet to agree to the terms. For more, we are joined by Stuart Livingston-Wallace, our executive editor for Middle East, North Africa, and Russia. Well, Stuart, we have been here before. Is this time any different? Are there any suggestions that we actually may get the deal across the line this time?
Yeah, good morning, Jumana. I mean, look, it's a very reasonable point. We have been here multiple times. As recently as last weekend, we thought maybe we're getting close to a deal. I will say that the mood music feels a little different this time. So, I mean, cautiously optimistic that perhaps we're getting closer there. And I think the comments we had from Bessent and also from Rubio, and also to some extent from Iran, all point towards the same thing, that there's maybe some issues over some of the language in this MOU, but broadly speaking, it feels like we're much further forward than we certainly were a couple of weeks ago. So cautious optimism, and I think that's reflected in markets today. You know, I think I heard you mention earlier the forward curve in oil. We all have a forward curve, and you're absolutely right. You know, that has been flattening over the last 24 hours. Similarly, you look in the options market for oil, you know, the most heavily traded options on the US benchmark yesterday were all puts at around the sort of 70, 75, 80, something around that level. So again, down from today, but it's not a gigantic sell-off. And I think reflective of where we started on this conversation, which is we've been here before, but this feels a little bit further forward.
Okay, Bloomberg's Stuart Livingston-Wallace, thank you so much for the latest there and what we can expect. Now let's discuss how markets are digesting all of this. We're joined now by Ludovic Subran, Chief Investment Officer over at Allianz. Ludovic, just picking up on what my colleague Stuart was saying there, you know, markets have been trading around deal optimism for the last month. I actually wonder, I'm beginning to wonder, if we indeed do even get a relief rally, if the deal is agreed to, say, over the course of the next couple of days, because there's already so much optimism priced in.
You're very much right on the equity markets, right? I think the equity markets has been running on a rally led mostly by AI and also the very good fundamental situation of the companies. I hope we get a rally on the bond side because as you look at the financing costs for governments, they've been going up, right? Especially last week, at least the past 10 days have been a bit of a sell-off. And so I think there is this problem of whether we will get the rally on the safe assets side. And also, I guess for the dollar, it's also a big question because a lot of people have been expecting the dollar to get a bit of a dent on the ceasefire. So that's a bit the two things we're looking at with the ceasefire as oil prices are going down. Then, as you know, the jury's out on the real economy, impacts, I would say 2 quarters into the ceasefire, right, where everybody has a bit of a concern that we will have some form of volatility on the inflation prints and so forth, and that could also derail again this happy moment on the ceasefire.
Yeah, looking ahead today, we've got those European CPI inflation prints. They're expected all to tick upwards. Do you still buy European fixed income in light of the backdrop of expected higher CPI prints to come?
I would say yes, mostly because when you look at the curve, it's still steep enough that you can play a bit this. I think there are expectations that central banks, especially in Europe, are going to hike maybe 2 times. But I would say it's very different from 22, right? My main concern now is whether there is a recessionary risk in Europe towards the second part of the year. That's why I mentioned there is still about 100 basis points baked of inflation coming to us by September. And so that's when the peak is going to be about. And as you know, it's also a period that will be politically charged in the UK, in France, in Italy. So everybody's a bit concerned about this. So I think European fixed income is still very active to play, but it's still, of course, very, very interesting, at least when you look at the yields. Yeah.
Ludovic, does that suggest you don't think the ECB is set for a policy mistake? You think that the market pricing around 2 hikes this year is justified? Because some of the guests we've spoken to have suggested the ECB is setting itself up for a policy mistake if it goes with potentially 50 basis points by the end of the year.
I believe I was very worried about a Trichet moment, let's be honest. I thought when I saw that people were starting to price in a bit the ECB hikes, I was thinking, oh, wow, that's not good because there is demand destruction around the line. What I see is, there are still a very high savings rates. In my country, it's 18%. In Germany, it's 20%. So there is still a lot of buffers and companies are doing quite okay. I would even say that margins are being defended in spite of the energy crisis. So is there, less growth in the pipe? Yes, but somehow resilience is good. And so I would say it's going to be very interesting whether the ECB can go through this without showing that it has to kill inflation if it goes beyond 3.5%. So it would be something that would be really walking a tightrope and something like a fine line. I don't think we're set for a policy mistake at all, but I think they shouldn't go much more overboard. Initially, we had only 1 hike. Now it looks like 2 hikes because of the time, right? Because now the ceasefire is delayed. I think beyond that, then we can talk maybe about a policy mistake.
Germano and I were discussing at the top of the show that there's just another day with a lot of headlines around the tech space. What for you is the tech play in Europe?
We're on the receiving end of this play. Right now, as an equity investor, whatever is going to happen with the SpaceX IPO, there is like 100 billion of money that is going to go into SpaceX passively. So I think on Europe, we're watching a bit like it's like Roland Garros, the French Open. We're seeing Dell, we're seeing, all this valuation, and we hope for the best with our own little actors. I think European companies are getting extremely worried that their own market cap is going to be dented by their very high dependence on the AI American actors. I remember an article that showed that 18% of a discount was due to the super dependency on American technology, and that was before the AI wave. Imagine what it will be tomorrow. And I think that's what most of the concerns are, whether our companies can adopt AI, but being a price receiver, not being completely affected when it comes to their profits. Yeah.
Ludovic, to pick up your tennis analogy, and I love tennis myself, Roland Garros, we're watching Roland Garros. Alcaraz didn't even participate due to an injury. Sinner had to withdraw yesterday due to excessive heat temperature. I just wonder how the reception to these IPOs and the 3 big ones, it's a 3-horse race over the next 6 months or so between Anthropic, OpenAI, and SpaceX. how that is going to determine where the AI trade goes from here. Because I think, one thing we need to remember is we're going to get a lot of new information when these companies go public about just how fast all of their various business and divisions are growing. Could that actually be the catalyst for the AI trade to stall, do you think?
This is a good point. I think the narrowness of the market, the so-called entropy, is going to be massive, right? Because you're going to have these actors that are going to enter, because of the SEC new ruling, they're going to enter the market and the indices very fast. And then there's going to be another accumulation point. And of course, OpenAI and Anthropic will be among the biggest valuation, in history and the biggest IPOs in history. So you're going to have even more of a concentrated on a few people. And on, I would say, very volatile financials, right? So I think, and we see that already in the equity market, this so-called overpositioning. A lot of people are getting concerned because the ride has been very good so far, in spite of a lot of headwinds. So I would say, with this IPO, there is one good thing. There must be an unclogging of the rest of the IPOs, because there's going to be cash and there's going to be maybe more of an M&A wave. That's a bit the forecast. But there's going to be also a massive risk of correction. Massive. We're talking, think about SpaceX. Only Starlink is really the profitable part. The rest is not making money. The company is valued at 1.75 trillion. Can you imagine the correction risk? So we're talking something in the round of 10, 20%. Can it happen? Not necessarily. But when you look at the narrowness of the market, you know that now when you're in the equity market, when you're in the NASDAQ, of course, when you're in the S&P 500, you are on 5 stocks. It's not even the Magnificent 7 anymore. It's 5 stocks. And so that's going to be something that a lot of equity traders have to take into account, because you're passively really accumulating to a point where there could be a cliff effect. So that's something that needs different risk management, different guidelines, different approach to making sure you diversify in a world that is concentrating.
It sounds like we need a new paradigm for investing by the end of this year, Ludovic, if all these IPOs come through.
And it's very interesting that you say that, because I think there is not a lot of thinking about this and the systemic implications of that, especially because of the passive investing. That's why I mentioned this passive force feeding from the ETF holders and the passive funds. I think there is something that needs to be thought about. Maybe you can think about threshold effect or some form of top exposure management. And I think a lot of funds are actually talking to their clients about this right now, just so that they understand how much they are exposed to people, because behind these companies, can you imagine the key man policies we're talking about? And that's also something in terms of governance. These companies will be watched like, milk on fire, as we say in French, because if something happens to one of these guys for whatever reason, imagine, how the success of the company is linked to a person that is this visionary. And I think that's something that is going to have to change in the future to create a proper ecosystem of, legacy and something that can work with people deciding to retire early or deciding to leave or whatnot. Yeah.
Really fascinating. I mean, particularly given the shareholding structures for people like Elon Musk, of course, who sits atop SpaceX. Allianz CIO, always a joy. Ludovic Souperin, thank you very much indeed. Have a great weekend, Ludovic. So we didn't get time to talk. Ludovic's been doing some deep thinking as well about, because you mentioned the heat at Roland Garros. He's been doing some deep thinking about the impacts of heat on the infrastructure of Europe and how that poses a major economic risk as well. So
productivity killer.
Yeah.
Productivity killer. We need more AC in general.
That's the answer, more AC.
It was cooler in Dubai.
Remarkable. Coming up, we're back to the tech story with Dell shares surging almost 40% in after-hours trade. We'll get some more analysis. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.
Know how the market day started.
Find out how it finishes.
Public markets to private markets.
From the micro to the macro.
Covering retail, entertainment, the business of sports.
The supply chains, trade policy, how it all is impacting the U.S. equity market as we drive to the closing bell at 4 p.m.
A holistic approach to covering financial markets.
If it matters to your life, we're covering it. I'm Katie Greifeld.
And I'm Romaine Bostic, and this is The Close.
Live every weekday.
Only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
My old mentor, Roger Staubach, who told me when I transitioned, football will never leave you, but you need to leave it.
Wow.
Everyone has a dream. And a lot of dreams are, you know, my dream is to play football and play professional football, and you get the dream comes true, but it is going to end. And the day it ends, the day before it ends, you're one of the best in the world. Great. The next day you wake up, that's gone. What are you great at? And the truth is nothing, right? I'm not great at anything else.
I talk about it all the time, Steve, is this whole idea of it's not from penthouse to penthouse. And what I mean by that is you played for 15, 20 years and you're in the penthouse. That doesn't mean that you come to the business world and you're going to be in the penthouse. Now, you don't start in the third floor or the lobby. You actually have to start in the basement.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Burden in London, and these are the stories that set your agenda.
Taking you from the U.S. markets close to the overnight session in Asia, we'll walk you through what you need to know to kickstart Europe's trading day. Live from our European headquarters, we bring you the day's top market-moving stories, unmatched expert analysis, and on-the-ground reporting from across the continent. Tune in to Daybreak Europe, only on Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything.
Join me each week on Wall Street Week for stories of capitalism from business, markets, economics, tech, and climate. More than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about.
We are 30 minutes away from the start of the opening trade this Friday. European futures pointing up just modestly, up 0.1%. There is optimism that maybe the US and Iran are closing in on that potential deal. Bloomberg reporting that this would be a 60-day extension to the ceasefire and potentially the reopening of the Straits of Hormuz with the needed signature from the president, of course. So that is the picture across the European futures picture, just up 0.1%. FTSE 100 futures pointing lower by 11 points. CAC current futures over in France looking to add 10 points.
Yeah, moderate moves there. So moderate moves for European bonds, which are just opening up. Not a whole lot of change, I will say. We've got 10-year yields bonds at 2.96, so basically unchanged on the open. 10-year OATs at 3.57, 10-year BTPs 3.68. We're going to be paying close attention to the CPI prints that will be coming later today that will likely influence the trajectory for many of these bond yields. But a bottom line is a bit of cautious optimism in the market today.
Yeah, tech has been a factor and certainly was overnight in the US, of course. The US market's hitting fresh record highs. Dell played that part. Dell shares soaring, at least the sentiment, soaring nearly 40% in after-hours trading after its annual sales outlook far surpassed analyst expectations. The hardware maker cited strong demand for AI servers, projecting $60 billion of revenue from that business alone for the fiscal year. Very pleased to say we can bring in Richard Clode now, portfolio manager in the global technology team at Janus Henderson. Richard, thank you for joining us this Friday morning. What do you make of the Dell shares? What the Dell move and the Dell earnings, and what it tells us about the broadening of the AI trade and how investors should be thinking about positioning?
Yeah, well, I think this is the next leg of it. You know, we've seen the kind of the GPU demand, the AI data center training centers, but then now it's about, you know, agentic AI, CPUs, orchestration, and that's just leading to just much stronger server demand. And I don't think there was much debate about the demand drivers for Dell. I think what really surprised was their ability to fulfill that demand and get that supply out of the door in a supply chain that's under a lot of stress, and then also to expand margins. I think that's the key sort of surprise out of this. And obviously that leads to very strong positive earnings revisions, which helps justify some of this move.
Should investors be thinking about cycling out of the GPU makers and out of the hyperscalers, and there's some evidence that that's been happening, and into some of these broader names? Or do you want to have a barbell approach? How do you think about balancing that exposure to the different components within the AI story?
And I think this is something that investors have got wrong through this last 3.5 years since ChatGPT launched. This is not a zero-sum game. This is an addressable market that is just expanding, exponentially, because, in my technology career, I've never seen a technology that's so correlated to compute. And then that's broadening out, as you say, GPUs to CPUs to storage to hard disk drives to optical. And I think, you want to own the leaders in all of those. And rather than thinking about, oh, no, now it's time to pivot into this and to pivot into that. And I think, doing that maybe has worked on a short-term basis, but on a long term, this is just a very expanding TAM across multiple sort of vectors. We want to take advantage of that.
The best performing stock market for this month has been the Kospi. And two names in particular there, we're looking at SK Hynix, Samsung, very notable that in the past couple of weeks, we've had SK Hynix and Micron breach $1 trillion market cap. There's been a huge amount of money going into the memory chip space. Is the vertical trajectory actually justified at this point?
Well, I think, a couple of vectors there. I mean, to think about it from, geography doesn't really matter. The Kospi's rocking because its two biggest memory stocks are the biggest portion of their index. If we had, Micron was 35% of the S&P 500, US equity returns would be, absolutely stellar. Yeah. And then, this is what's different to phase 99 or 2000. These companies are making an extraordinary amount of money. SanDisk makes more money than Goldman Sachs or Coca-Cola. And so this rally has been justified by earnings growth. But as you mentioned, Micron's managed to double its market cap to $1 trillion in 48 days. That is quite fast.
Do you worry about the leverage that's building up in the system and the fact that so many retail players are getting involved, via some of these ETFs, but also, leveraging up exposures as well? That could have broad knock-on effects to the space.
Exactly. I think putting leverage onto cyclical stocks isn't necessarily a good thing to do, and will end in tears at some point. But as long as you have that earnings, growth, and that looks like it's durable, and they're signing these 5-year contracts with financial teeth and guarantees, that gives us a bit more confidence this is going to be stronger for longer. But it will also remain sort of cyclical. And as we were saying before we came on air, it seems like that retail crowd that was trading crypto and Bitcoin before has now found a new kind of sandbox to play in, and that's in DRAM stocks.
So to be clear, memory chip makers, they are still cyclical, because there's some debate about that.
Semis will always be cyclical. It will never be completely different this time. There will be nuances that make some differences, but it will always be cyclical.
Interesting.
We've also been discussing the IPO story, haven't we?
Yeah.
With SpaceX, of course, coming through with a valuation maybe around 1.8 trillion, looking to raise 75 billion, and then potentially OpenAI and Anthropic later this year. What do you think that does to movements around liquidity? I mean, particularly when they get put into the major indexes and that exposure that so many investors will be getting by default?
Yeah, well, I mean, it certainly doesn't seem to have impacted in terms of, say, Micron doubling to $1 trillion market cap in the space of 48 days. That still managed to, lead to other stocks going up as well. But I think it's a valid concern. I mean, we saw that through, 99, 2000. And, the market, particularly in the US, has benefited from, I think Paul Tudor Jones was saying this, 2 to 3% of market cap being retired every year through buybacks. And now we've got a big chunk of incremental supply coming on now. That's less so in the IPOs, but more when we think about those lockups expiring into next year. And that will lead to some supply that will have to be digested. I think the big difference versus 2000 is, these companies are actually the leaders. They're not 365 tech IPOs that will never make any money. These companies are leaders in AI and should, in some cases, make a lot of money, in which case that's going to hopefully mean that not everyone's going to want to dump the stocks as soon as those lockups come through.
But to Tom's point, is there going to be any cannibalization effect? Because so much of the interest and the focus and the flows are going to be centered around these gigantic IPOs that are expected to come.
Yes, but just think about the size of some of these stocks and the move that we've seen even in the last 6 weeks or the last couple of months. There is appetite to take these stocks up, but ultimately in any sort of short-term period, it's why has the stock gone up or down? There's more buyers than sellers, so there will need to be some digestion. As I said, maybe less so around the actual IPOs, but more maybe 6 months later when some of those unlocks come through. Although as we know with SpaceX, they are staggering that.
Yeah.
Have we answered the capex and monetization question? Has the earnings story from the hyperscalers and the chip makers, have they answered that concern that had been a nagging concern for some investors?
Exactly, and that's been the pivot, right, in the last, even maybe in the last 6 months, that we've gone from, is this justifiable? Can they monetize this? Can this capex keep going? To let's start underpinning TAMs into 2030.
Are you convinced they can?
I'm convinced that we're seeing a lot more milestones that we're much more confident that you can. I think that's the launch of agentic AI and the productivity, the value add of that. And so what you're willing to pay for that is exponentially higher than even a co-pilot world. And then I think, the poster child for this is Anthropic. I mean, to be close to 50 billion of annualized versus 9 billion at the end of last year, and to be close to profitability, that's a revenue ramp and a profitability ramp I've never seen in my career as a tech investor.
Yeah, I mean, I can't believe we've been speaking for 10 minutes and we haven't mentioned NVIDIA once. I do need to ask you about NVIDIA, and something in your report caught my attention. NVIDIA close to $200 billion of annualized free cash flow. They've announced a new shareholder return program that took the market obviously by surprise positively when they announced it. To what extent do you think this could be an inflection point to the upside for NVIDIA?
Yes, I think a couple of things. I mean, as an active investor, again, Paul Tudor-Jones was saying this point that, all these hyperscalers don't have the free cash flow to buy back stock as much as they did in the past. But, NVIDIA does. Yeah. And so hence we got this new shareholder return program. And I made the parallels, when they reported results, very similar to what Apple did back in 2012. 5 years after the launch of an iPhone, had this extraordinary level of growth. Then everyone said this isn't sustainable. They're going to be the next Nokia or Motorola. Stock really derated. And then they put in this shareholder return program to say, look, this is real. We're an ecosystem company. We're going to have lots of profit and free cash flow growth in the future. Here's some dividends. Here's some buybacks. Same things happened to NVIDIA. Extraordinary growth, massive derating, discount to the S&P 500. Here we're going to show you that we're not the next kind of, sort of stock that's going to roll over and the profits are going to roll over. We believe in this, and so you should re-rate our stock. So, that will take time, but I do think it was an important announcement that they made.
Yeah.
Richard, thank you very much indeed. Really, really great insights on another big day for the tech story and trying to give us some clarity on terms of what to think about and how to position. Of course, Richard Clove, Portfolio Manager in the Global Technology team at Janus Henderson. Meanwhile, the AI-driven rally, of course, has helped propel global equities to record highs this week, but with it growing concerns of potential disruptions to the labour market. We discussed the potential threat to jobs with industry experts and leading market voices throughout the week.
You have employers telling us that they feel pressure from investors, from shareholders, from senior management to introduce AI into the workforce. But actually what we're also seeing is that people are just putting AI buttons on every tool rather than thinking on how to redesign perhaps work or organizations.
Advanced economies are much more, specialized in the knowledge economy, and they have, we have 27% average employment exposed. If you look at emerging markets, that's sort of 10%. So there's like, a cleavage there.
It's very possible to take an existing workforce that used to do a certain task without AI and where their jobs is profoundly changed with artificial intelligence, and to reskill them on time. So we work with our customers to make sure that they can reskill, that they can equip their people with the best AI technology.
The US and China have really thrown the kitchen sink into, this big, massive AI boom. The reality is that Europe has been left behind. So my biggest concern is growth and productivity.
Some companies within any sectors will be disruptive. Sometimes visibility is there, other times it's not there.
I think we're in an experimentation phase, but I think we need to do more work, more research as well, to understand what should we rely on people to do, right? So what is human judgment really useful for, most valuable for? What does this mean in terms of how do I design my work?
Some people would say that there's maybe a little bit of a bubble in AI. When you have companies with market caps of $5 trillion, you don't see any bubble there at all?
Whenever we have an acceleration in technology and people get excited about it, you have significant capital formation around new companies that are trying to capitalize on that opportunity. And we've seen this before through history, and you're seeing it now. It won't be a straight line. The opportunity set with AI is enormous. There will be winners and losers. And it's hard to pick the winners and losers now. And certainly a lot of the capital that's being deployed will not produce adequate returns, and a bunch of the capital that's being deployed will actually not produce any returns. But it's hard, it's hard to call the timing on these things. And the thing I'd point to just from a historical lens is in the fall of 1996, Alan Greenspan talked about irrational exuberance in stock markets, and the NASDAQ was at 1,300. And the NASDAQ peaked 3.5 years later at over 5,000. So, these things can go on for a long time, but ultimately, there are adjustments, there will be drawdowns, there'll be rebalancing, and just, it's hard to call it because the technology trend and the investment is real.
From the world of politics to the world of business, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live 2 times a day, every trading day. Balance of Power at 1 and 5 Eastern, only on Bloomberg.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute global news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Joanna Bersecci in El Ula, Saudi Arabia, and this is Bloomberg.
Happy Friday. We're about 15 minutes from the opening trade. European futures pointing higher just by 0.1%. There's a little bit of caution around the geopolitics, even as there seems to be some incremental moves in terms of getting closer to that potential deal. Losses of about 0.5% for European stocks yesterday. Fresh record highs for the US and looking to build that in terms of US futures. European futures then pointing up by just 0.1%.
And not even benefiting from some of the tech tailwinds that have been coming through from both Asia and from the US overnight.
We'll watch some of those names like Infineon, ST Micro, and see if they benefit from the upside that's come through for Dell.
40% upside as we were just talking about. Well, we are on alert for French CPI. I do want to flag yesterday the ECB minutes, pretty hawkish, with members saying that there are significant upside risks surrounding the inflation outlook. It is now evident that the energy price shock was not only large, but also becoming more persistent, so hinting towards rate hikes. So now here we have the numbers for France. The annualized figure, so the year-on-year figure, has come in at 2.8%. So that is lower than expectations of 2.9%. And in terms of the monthly figure, we are getting a month-on-month increase of 0.1%. Again, that is marginally weaker than expectations of 0.2%. So those are the figures coming through. We also got GDP numbers as well. A little bit of a contraction there coming through, Tom. So minus 0.1% for the first quarter versus expectations of flat growth. And this really just is an example of stagflation. That's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing stagnant growth, if not slightly negative growth, and persistently high inflation figures, slightly lower than expectations, but still a very serious case of stagflation.
Euro-dollar largely unchanged on the back of this data at 1.16. We'll get more data across the Eurozone, of course, over the next few hours. Talking of inflation, the St. Louis Fed president says policymakers need to be open to the possibility of a rate hike given current economic conditions. Alberto Masalam told us he agrees with Fed officials who wanted to drop an easing bias from the April statement.
Their real policy rate right now is running at around 0.5%, which is lower than the 1% that the committee believes is the neutral rate. I think you have to look at the full picture, and it looks to me like policy is at or slightly below the committee's long-run neutral level.
But if you combine that with the other things you talk about, you had emphasized the risks of the inflationary pressures on the demand side and the supply side of the economy. It sounds like you think they should be leaning towards tightening. It sounds like you might have been one of the policymakers in the April meeting who actually thought they should have removed the statement against tightening in the statement.
So yes, I supported the interest rate decision, but I thought the easing bias was no longer consistent with the outlook and the balance of risks, which in my mind, the balance of risk has shifted a little bit towards the inflation side and less towards the employment side. So whether the economy will require a hike or a cut or a hold will depend on the scenario. There is a scenario where inflation remains high. There's no disinflation in the next quarter or two. And in that scenario, the economy will probably require a hike. There's also a scenario where the economy weakens materially in the second half of the year because real incomes are challenged and corporate margins are challenged. In that scenario, inflation could come down. In that scenario, we would be thinking of no hikes, maybe even a cut. So there are two scenarios to play with here.
But looking down the track, at least the markets are now fully pricing a rate hike by March 2027. Given where we are now, how we think things are going to proceed with oil prices and some of the risks on the supply side that you talk about, do you think that's a sensible thing for them to price?
Again, I think there are two scenarios here, and I don't comment normally on market pricing. I'm more focused on what's best for the economy and for Main Street. Markets have repriced materially in the U.S. and in other countries in the front end of the curve. I think that's markets trying to understand what our reaction function is.
St. Louis Fed President Alberto Mazzala speaking with Bloomberg's Stephanie Flanders on the sidelines of the Reykjavik Economic Conference. Let's turn now to today's markets in 3 minutes on the opening trade with Paul Dobson, Bloomberg's executive editor for Asia Markets, standing by. Paul, you have an eye on the dollar. Does the dollar turn lower if we get a deal to reopen the strait?
Yeah, morning, Tom. So we're coming off the back of what's been a rare good month for the dollar, but most strategists see that this is being a positive month in the midst of a downtrend. And one of the things that could catalyze that would certainly be a reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and some of that haven money that has been put in the US currency in recent weeks and months unwinding again. But that's not the only reason that people are starting to take a more bearish perspective on the dollar from here. It's true that the market is moving now to price in Fed hikes, and the idea that the Fed is going to remove that easing bias quite soon. But it's also true that the market isn't really seeing the Fed moving until early next year. And in the meantime, it's expecting that the ECB, the BOE, and other major central banks will be raising interest rates faster. So that's one reason why people are looking for dollar weakness relative to its major peers. Of course, over here in Asia, you're already seeing signs of that happening with more central banks moving quicker.
Yeah, well, Paul, let me ask you about that, because in DM world, we talk about a 25 basis point rate hike. In EM, it's significantly more. And we've had the likes of the Sri Lankan Central Bank raise interest rates by 100 basis points. You've had interest rate raises come through from Pakistan, from Indonesia as well, to the tune of 50 basis points. How much is that going to go in terms of stabilizing those currencies and those countries' currencies, which are coming under selling pressure?
It's a good question, Jimana, and I think in the Asia region, there's two different reasons why central banks are hiking. One is because they're worried about growth and inflation, and we're seeing that becoming part of the conversation in the likes of South Korea, maybe Japan as well, and Australia and New Zealand, but others that are hiking to sort of protect as a defensive move, because the high price of importing oil is really hurting their economy as well as driving up inflation. And I think the likes of Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Pakistan, as you mentioned, those are the ones that are moving more aggressively to try to protect the currencies. But actually, because they're in this point of distress, that's not working so well. So most of those currencies are giving back some of the gains that they've taken recently.
Paul, does the BOJ still hike at its next meeting, given the slightly softer than expected inflation out of Tokyo?
It seems imperative for the BOJ to get on with things, Tom. It's got runaway inflation that's really pushing up yields at the back end of the curve. People are starting to question the credibility of the central bank and its ability to control inflation. And also, the yen is still on the ropes, right? We'll learn later today exactly how much they spent defending it and trying to prop it up, but it's already weakened back towards that 160 level. So unless they hike and signal that there's going to be more hikes, you could see the scenario where even in that weaker dollar case that we've been talking about, the yen still comes under more pressure.
Paul Dobson.